will call this meeting to order. Welcome to the Board of Education workshop meeting of September 13th, 2011. Mrs. Walsh, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Hirsch?
Here.
Mrs. Stufen?
Here.
Mr. Bloom?
Here.
Mr. McDonough?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mrs. Droney?
Here.
Mrs. Ebner?
Here. 7 board members are here. Contrary to our agenda, we did not meet in closed session this evening. That portion of our meeting was canceled. Would you please rise and join me with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next item on our agenda, I'm sorry, Mr. Welton, I wouldn't have started without you. Next item on our agenda is public comments. No one has indicated a desire to address the board this evening, so we will go right on to superintendent's communication. The first item is the presentation of the Elmhurst 205 annual report. Mr. Purnell.
Yes, let me, before the board this evening, you have a copy of what is, I believe, the first annual report in Elmhurst. And I want to thank Malia Smith, our communications director, for putting this together. There were a lot of hours. Even before I was officially here, she was emailing me details of the annual report. And so, Malia, I'm going to turn over to Malia just to give you the highlights of the annual report. But I think it's a great document for the community about Elmhurst 205. So, Malia? Yeah.
I can just speak from here, right? Well, as Mr. Pruneau said, I do believe this is our first annual report, and those of you who were on the board when I arrived in the district a year ago will remember that I did make a little promise to create such a document, and so I wanted to keep that promise. In my former district, this was a very popular format, and so I wanted to bring it to District 205. We hope that this will be a great identity piece for the district, that it will have a year-long shelf life, and we found in my former district that we would even keep them from year to year and sort of compare where we had moved and what we had done, and so it becomes something of a historical document. In the process, we have replaced a twice annual newsletter mailed out to the community with this once annual report to the community, which saved us, in terms of production, print, postage, about $4,800. So I'm happy to report that. We've had really good response to this so far, so I hope that the board is pleased with the end product, and I hope that the community finds it useful also. If people have not received it in the mail for any reason and would like a copy, we do have extra copies here at the district office, and people can come and pick one up. It's also posted online in an electronic format that has links to even further information on various topics, so it's actually linked from the home page under the district drop-down box. Are there any questions?
Mr. Collins.
I don't really have a question, I have a comment. First of all, I agree. This is very, very professionally done, and I appreciate it. I'm very glad you're here. And I am just looking forward to future years so we can compare our accomplishments as our district grows and improves.
Thank you.
One caveat for this evening. The achievement data that is in the annual report is the most current that was there when we started putting this together. But it's not going to be as current as the information you're going to get tonight from Dr. John. So you're going to have, this is a one-year-old snapshot, and you're going to get the most current from Dr. Johns tonight. So just, so if you're looking to see the data match, it's not going to match because it's different data.
Yes, this is a report that reviews 2010, 2011, and actually the data is mainly taken from the 2010 state report card, so that's even older than that, but it was the most current data available when we went to press.
Ms. Hirsch?
I want to echo Mr. Collins' statements. I think it's a great piece. It's professionally done. It covers a lot of different areas and in more depth than I think we've been able to cover in the past. And I would encourage us to be open to consider shifting the scheduling and the delivery of it so that we can include the most recent achievement data. I think that's what we're all about we're striving to, and I realized that we were trying to get it out, and no criticism at all, but I think we can strive to have even more current information available and in people's hands as soon as is timely. I think that's probably the biggest assessment of how well the schools are doing is we look at student achievement and how they're doing. And so that might be a consideration, in the future.
I agree. Although it will be interesting to see with what Dr. Johns presents tonight.
Anyone else? I just will add that I've heard nothing but positive things about it in the community. And I was going to ask, and maybe that will be up for discussion, is whether or not it will come out at the same time every year. Is it something that you have time to do during the summer months, so that's why
Yes.
it gets done then? Yeah.
Yes, actually, the goal was to get it out probably mid-July. Certainly, 1st of August at the latest, but with all the transitions that took place this summer, that became very difficult. But that would be, I think, the ideal time just in terms of workflow, but we can certainly discuss that.
Thank you and your staff again.
Yes, and I do want to say thank you. It really was a team effort, so the administrators who are sitting here were very helpful in that process. My assistants, Debbie Holstein and Kathy Schrader, were invaluable, and we had a great designer, so it was a team effort, and I want to thank everyone for it.
The next item on our agenda is the sixth-day enrollment report. Mr. Pruneau.
Yes, I just want to update the board on all important what our enrollment data looks like for this school year. There's really two documents I'd like to point out that was in your board pack tonight. First of all, I provided you with a comparison of our six-day enrollment from 2010, 2011 to 2011-12 for this current year. And in summary, the elementary numbers are down compared to a year ago by about 47 students. Interesting, our middle school, all three were up almost 30 plus at each school, and we netted 100 new students at all three middle schools, which is kind of interesting. And then at York, we kind of maintained the same. We really had 3 new students come in. So we have a net increase this year of enrollment of 56 students to Elmhurst 205 this year. That and the other thing I gave you, the second document, is the correlation to the CASARTA projections. And for new board members, the CASARTA was a consulting firm that came in. The last time the presentation was given, as I understand it, was 2007. However, at that presentation, they did projections out to 2012, 2013. So the data is still current as far as those projection goes. If board members are interested, I do have the last full report, so you can see everything that went into that report that the consultant did. They look at birth rates, they look at home development. There's a lot of factors they go in. And what that report gives you is a projection of 3 projections. One is minimal. That is considered the A track. And the A track would mean, based on their projections, this would be the minimal amount of students you could expect to come to Elmhurst 205. B is the most likely track that we're going to experience based on the data they're looking at. And C would be the maximum number of students that you would see coming to Elmhurst. And so overall, as a district, what we're experiencing this past year is slightly above B. So that would mean we're a little bit above what was expected on the projections for going forward. So basically, we're right on target with the projections as they happen right now. I think that's pretty interesting because in 2007, the housing market was different. The dynamics were a lot different than what they are right now. And yet, projection and enrollment-wise, we're still maintaining exactly what those projections are. So, a different dynamic, but still maintaining people, I think, moving into Elmhurst and coming to the school district. So with that, any questions from the board?
Ms. Hirsch.
Sometimes we get caught up in the CASARTA data and we look at what the growth is, but I think it's important to note, looking back historically, that we still continue to add students to our student population. When I look back, I think from the time that I moved into Elmhurst in 1993, I think we've added a Lincoln and maybe a Hawthorne or an Emerson in terms of student population. The number of kids that we have had move in the last 18 years come attend school in Elmhurst. So it's looking at 1 year to the next is where we are because we're looking at it from a short-term perspective. But when we look at the long-term growth of our student enrollment has been significant. And I think we've done a pretty good job of managing resources and growing along the way. I do have one detailed question, and I apologize, I can't help myself. Edison lost 28 kids. Do we have any idea? It's highly unusual for one elementary and one of our smaller elementary schools to lose such a great number of kids. Not that we're going to change the way we do things, but it's just a significant number and interested in learning a little bit more.
Yeah. And I don't have an answer. I don't know.
Doesn't have anything to do with who moved into the neighborhood.
I wasn't going to say that, but thank you.
Any other question? Mr. Bloom?
So this is the tail end of the last report, the last projection they did, the third year of their 3-year projection?
No, they still have for the elementary. We still have through 12-13.
Okay. Are we going to update that as a basis for?
I would think it's something we'd have to talk to the board about, but I would think that data is probably valuable to look at projections and see what it is. But it would be hiring the consultant and doing an update. They do have the updates that go beyond 12-13 for middle school and high school, but only did it through 13 for elementary.
Ms. Hirsch?
One of the challenges, because at the time, I got into this data at a very detailed level. If you look at the district level numbers, CASARDA's projections were right on, and it's playing out that way, that we're right around B. We're a couple larger. The challenge that we had is Dr. CASARDA does not have an understanding of the local elementary school dynamics, and that is where the CASARDA estimates were not as reliable as we wanted them to be. We have to make decisions in terms of facilities and teaching staff and those kind of things, and Emerson was not predicted. Emerson was C or above for the last 4 years. So there was value in looking at from the overall district perspective, but the value of the CASARDA data at the individual elementary school data, they're in North Carolina, their ability to really understand the local market within the elementary school boundary areas just were not reliable enough for us to plan in terms of facilities and staff. So they're not saying that there's not value in going out and saying from the overall perspective, but we really struggled with understanding what happened at Lincoln and what happened at Emerson. Those were unusual and not predicted.
But I guess my question is one of the things I think we as a board have talked about is a longer-term projection and outlook so that we can project costs before we ask for revenue so that we can justify what we're asking for. And you got to start somewhere. And so the question is whether this is the best available piece of data as we sit here today, or is there something else we do? My point is just that I would like us to have some longer-term data out there so that when we get together and start talking about budget, that we can start looking at 2 and 3 years down the road so that we can give the community a better idea of what's in the pipeline.
I don't disagree. It's valuable data just in a long-term planning session. There's going to be variables, but I think if you look at the data, they've been pretty on overall. I think when you get to the finer detail of individual schools, I think for any projection, there's a lot of variables. But overall, for a district perspective, I think they're pretty accurate in these assessments. Just going back to what Maria said too, in 07-08, the district's total enrollment was 7,823. So you can see we continue to grow at a fairly steady rate through those years.
Any other questions or comments about these 6-day enrollment? Seeing none, let's move on to the district student achievement report for 2010-2011. Mr. Pruneau.
Yes, this evening we are going to go and do our what I hope will be an annual review of our total achievement data for the district. I want to thank Dr. Johns and his staff right off the bat for putting together a very comprehensive report. We wanted to make sure this report was transparent. We wanted to make sure that it was an honest report given to the community and to the board about where we are student achievement-wise. I think you will see some great things that we're doing in Elmhurst, and you're going to find some things that we can improve on. And again, as I took over as superintendent, the important thing for me was to make sure that there was an understanding that as a great district, we're going to continue to look at where we can improve and improve that. And it wasn't about pointing fingers, but it's looking as a system of moving forward and improving our overall across the district, student achievement, satisfaction levels, all of that. So this is one of, I believe, a number of reports we're going to come back to the board with over the next year to give you more detail about things like student achievement, but also some other things that we want to focus on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Johns, and he will take you through the PowerPoint this evening.
I learned that at the special meeting, right? Thank you, David. Good evening. Our district achievement summary outlines a number of key academic indicators for the 2010-2011 school year, and has been noted twice now, it's a different set of data than what Malia provided for you in the report to the community. The results that we're sharing this evening really constitute a 30,000-foot view of purely academic indicators, and as highlighted by Mr. Pernot, it would be unfair and inaccurate just to look at academic indicators and just these academic indicators when trying to make an overall assessment of the quality of the district. Although we think these academic indicators represent a very good district, there's so much more that goes into making that quality assessment. Before I proceed any further, I wanted to thank the board who reached out early and let me know of certain questions or concerns they had in the positive report we had about the 120-page report that you have. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't give all the credit to Charles Sprandl, who did all the work. And there was a considerable amount of work that he had to do digging up, unearthing, and assimilating all this data. His position is really of great need in this district. And while he has put together a great report here, I think the work that he has done to make this report will pay off down the road as we add additional features in the future. Speaking of new features, for this performance report, we chose to provide the board with information in both that is different in both content and delivery from what previous boards experienced. This year, we chose to include some process level indicators. We switched to a much more graphical display of the results, and we'll be highlighting a number of areas which we believe indicate value-added gains of the District 205 academic program. Throughout the report and presentation, I would like to call your attention to three themes. The first of all is this value-added concept. It refers to the average amount of growth that our students experience between one assessment and a later assessment in time. We think it's very important because it neutralizes variables that are not of the school district's influence. For example, we know that this is a very high-performing community, and we have great scores because of the community. By using value-added assessments, by using a value-added approach, we're able to isolate where the district is making a difference in these children's lives. So we think it's a very important statistic in evaluating a school district. Additionally, tonight we're showing cohort data. In the past, we might make comparisons between one sixth grade and another sixth grade, despite the fact that they're different sets of children. What we're showing tonight is how a group of children persisted through a school district and how well they did, and we feel that provides an indicator of the quality or the benefit that comes to children who come to District 205. And I think that's one of the celebrations that I hope Charles will point out of really that great value that a District 205 education provides for the children of our community. And finally, we're providing some in-process measurements of performance. We're using data more and more on the regular basis in how we operate our schools. Tonight, we're going to provide data that comes from the Northwest Education Association's measurement of annual progress. And this is data that we're using much more frequently. We give the assessment in the fall and in the spring and sometimes in the winter, and we make academic decisions based upon it. It is one of those sources of data where teachers get right away. The unfortunate thing with our statewide assessments, our mandatory assessments, is you typically get the data well after you've done all the preparation work for the upcoming school year. For example, Charles got much of the data that we're going to share tonight in August, long after all of our summer workshops were completed, long after the great windows of opportunity to make long-term planning for the upcoming school year. So by having having map data and other forms of in-process data, we're able to make changes much more quickly. If I can turn now to the presentation, Charles is going to highlight 5 different sets of data, and many of which you're familiar with. The first is the ISAT, the Illinois Standards Achievement Test, the MAP, which I just mentioned, the Measures of Academic Progress, the familiar Prairie State Achievement Assessment, which is given to 11th graders, whereas the ISAT is given to the second grade through 8th grade. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Educational Planning and Assessment System. This is the product that's created by ACT that enables us to see how children grow from 8th grade through our high school program. And then finally, Charles is going to highlight the results we had this year on our Adequate Yearly Progress, also known as AYP, which is the measurement of whether or not we made it or didn't make it when it comes to the No Child Left Behind legislation from some years ago. Charles is going to highlight a number of places where there's cause to celebrate the great work of our staff who've been really dedicated in the growth and improvement of our district, and point out some areas that need either additional investigation or we would like to consider as opportunities for improvement. So I'll let Charles take it away, and I've got a couple slides I'll interrupt him on if I get a chance.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start with ISAT just to kind of give you an idea of the layout and the way that I'm going to approach this. For each one of the slides that we look at, I'm going to take a minute to orient you to what you're seeing and what it means. Some of these are new ways of looking at data that are different than we have in the past, so I want to make sure everybody understands what's behind the visualization that you're seeing. And then, as Charles said, I'm going to try to highlight what are the things that we can celebrate, what are the things that show what a good job we're doing in District 205, and then I'm also going to try to draw attention where the data shows that there are questions. Now, I'll caution the board, you will immediately want to jump to, well, what's the answer to those questions? This level of data really doesn't give us those answers. It's going to take more work. It's going to take digging into the data more deeply to try to figure out what the answers to those questions are. We are starting with the ISAT examination, which, as Dr. Johns mentioned, is given in grades 3 through 8 in the spring. It's our state accountability measure. It's given in each grade in both reading and math. Science is only assessed in grades 4 and grade 7. So the graph that you're looking at is one that is very similar to ones that we've looked at in the past. Our proficiency measure is the total percentage of students that are meeting or exceeding state standards. A couple of things to notice about the graph. First of all is we have a very high percentage of students that meet that proficiency standard in our elementary and our middle schools in all 3 subjects. You also notice there's a general trend upward in all of those measures. So we're making progress putting more kids into that meets and exceeds category. Now, the first question that is generally asked is, we know we're a high-achieving district, but how are we doing in pushing students from that meets category into the exceeds category, which is what the next graph is looking at. This is basically comparing 2 snapshots. It's the same time frame of the previous slide. We're looking at 2006 compared to 2011. How many kids were in the exceeds category in 2006 versus our most recent assessment. If you look at the very first blue bar that's reading for 3rd grade and it's showing a 10% increase, what that means is where that number comes from. In 2006, 40% of our 3rd graders were exceeding in reading. In our latest assessment, that was 50% that were exceeding. So that's where that 10% increase comes from. Now, as we look at this, things to celebrate, there are a lot of very high bars on there that we have increased the percentage of students that are in the exceeds category in every single grade level and every single subject. Questions that arise, you would naturally go to where the lower bars and start to ask what's going on there. For some of those bars, for example, the 3rd grade math, some of those bars we're already achieving at such a high level, it becomes difficult to move more students into that exceeds category. The 3rd grade math, as an example, we're at 71% of our students are in the exceeds category. So it becomes more difficult. There are less students available to move into there. So that explains some of those bars. 8th grade reading, though, does remain a question. And again, that's one of those questions. If this graph, this set of data doesn't give us the answer of what's going on in 8th grade reading, why aren't we seeing more students move into that exceeds category? And that's something that principals and teacher teams will dig into the data further and try to come up with what's going on in that situation. The next 2 slides are going to be the cohort data that Dr. Johns was describing. And this one, again, this is something new. It's a way that we have not looked at this data in the past. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just orient you to what you're seeing. First of all, each line represents a group of kids as they move through District 205 schools. The example that Charles gave, we're used to looking at, okay, how does 3rd grade reading compared to last year's 3rd grade reading compared to the year before that? And that is a valid way to look at it and does give us some information. But each one of those groups is a whole different set of kids that may come with a different set of challenge. So it's not necessarily valid to take trend data from that. What we've tried to do here is we've peeled out any students that moved in, any students that moved out, and we're just looking at the achievement of students that were in our system that entire time. Cohort 1 represents a group of kids from 3rd grade through 7th grade in 7th grade last year, so that's our current 8th grade class. Cohort 2 is the group of students that moved through the system the year before, so that's our current freshman class. And Cohort 3 is the year before that, our current sophomore class. A couple of things to notice, again, to celebrate. One is the upward movement of the last 2 cohorts. Both of those cohorts have an upward trend. They're ending at a higher place than they're beginning. What that's telling us is that as students are in District 205 schools, they are progressing more rapidly than their national peers. Because the measure that we're actually looking at here is the percent of our students that are scoring above the national average. Within the ISAT, there are 30 questions that are embedded that come from a SAT-10 test, which is nationally normed. So one of the pieces of information we get about each student is what their national percentile is. So what we're measuring here is how many of our kids scored above the national average. So looking at that blue line, moving from less than 90% to above 95%, what that's telling you is that our students are progressing more rapidly than their national peer group. And that goes to that value-added measure that Dr. Johns was talking about. Another thing to celebrate here, for most of the grades, if you look at a particular grade and follow it up, in most cases, you'll run into the green line first, and then the red line, and then the blue line, which what that's telling you is that each successive group of students that moves through the system is performing higher than the group that came before it, which goes to those incremental improvements in the systems, tweaks that we make to the curriculum. Students are having a better experience each successive year. A couple of questions that arise out of this. One is for all 3 cohort groups, we see a dip from 5th grade to 6th grade. There's something about that transition from elementary school to middle school where, and again, this graph isn't showing that they're digressing. What it's showing is that during that year, their national group is moving forward more rapidly than our students are, and that's why that line is dipping down. The most recent cohort is less of a dip than the cohort before it, which is encouraging. But again, that's one of those questions that's going to entail more digging to figure out what might be going on there. Another question that arises, I think, when you look at it, is the 7th to 8th grade. Okay, the 2 cohorts that we have data for 7th to 8th grade are dipping down. We don't know for this most recent cohort until we get next year's data if that is continuing or if that's something that has been fixed as we've made changes to the system. If we switch to math, largely the same story. Although for this, all 3 cohorts end at a higher spot than where they started. We're still seeing those upward trends. We're still seeing that 5th to 6th grade dip. So that's true for both reading and for math. Again, we're seeing much less of a dip in the most recent cohort, which is encouraging, but it's still not moving upwards, so that's worth digging into and figuring out what's going on. Right, moving on to our MAP assessment. We're relatively young with MAP. We've been using it for 3 years, the first year being an implementation year, and then feeling more confident about our data for the last 2 years. MAP gives us several pieces of information. One piece that it gives us is for each student, we get a reading score, we get a math score, and that score is correlated to specific skills and specific learning targets. And teachers get that information the day after students take the test. And that gives teachers something that they can use immediately as they're differentiating in their classrooms, as we're doing flexible grouping, those kinds of things, as they're designing instruction. So, for example, in math, they get a math score, but they also get scores for algebra. They get scores for number sense, so they get subgroups of that. If a teacher sees that their class isn't performing as well in measurement, so they have a weakness in a particular topic area, they can design instruction so that they build in more opportunities for students to learn measurement rather than maybe just in that measurement unit. So it gives teachers immediate information that they can act on in the classroom. It also gives us some measures, and these are measures that are shown here, that we can use in the same way we've looked at ISAT data in the past to kind of evaluate the system. The red lines, the red bars, are the same measure we were looking at with the cohorts, only we're looking at MAP data rather than ISAT data. It's the percentage of our students that score above the national average. MAP is a nationally normed test, so that's one of the measures we get for each student. And we can see in reading, both at the elementary level and at the middle school level, we're right around 80%, so 4 out of 5 Elmhurst students are above the national average. The blue bars probably take a little bit more explanation. The blue bars are the percent that are meeting typical growth, is how MAP describes that. That's another number that we get for each student after they take the test. So if a third grade student takes the reading test and gets a 150 RIT score, they get a 150 for their reading score. What the people at NWEA have done through their norming study is they've looked at, okay, for third graders across the country that start the year at 150, what's the average amount of growth that we're going to see for those students during their third grade year? So in other words, when they start their third grade year, I know I scored a 150. On average, we'll see those students score a 157 at the end of the year. So what that blue bar is telling you is how many of our students met or exceeded that average growth. So kind of the baseline that you're looking at there is if we're at 50%, then we're progressing statistically in an average way. You know, the way that is expected, the way that's typical for average according to MAP's data. So anything above 50% means that we are progressing more rapidly than their national peer group. So again, if you think back to those ISAT graphs, the cohort graphs, a score above 50% here is what drives those lines upward because they're progressing faster than the average for their national peer group. So for reading, at the elementary level, we see that we are a little bit above that 50%. In middle school, we're right at that 50% meeting or exceeding average growth. For math, again, the red bars give us an indication of overall achievement. Again, we have a very high percentage of our students scoring above the national average. When we look at the blue bars for elementary math, 58.9, pushing close to 60% is a good, strong number for that. Okay, that's increasing the slope. That line is moving up more quickly as we push that number higher and our students are achieving faster than their national peer group. In middle school, 50.8, we're just above that average growth. The next 2 slides just take that typical growth reading and break it out by grade level. And again, we can see at the elementary level for reading, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade are achieving well above that 50%. We're seeing the same thing at 7th grade for reading. Again, a caution with this is here we're looking at 1 year's worth of data. So this is a 1-year snapshot. So automatically one of the questions you ask is, well, what's going on at 2nd grade? What's going on at 6th grade? What's going on at 8th grade? All 3 of those groups were above 50% the year before. So again, this is one of those things, we're relatively young in using map data. We don't have enough data yet to really build those cohorts and watch a group of kids move through to know if there's a curricular issue, there's something specific to that second grade class, or what's going on there. But again, that's a question that warrants our attention and something that we need to dig into. Same set of numbers for math. Here across the board at the elementary level, we're above that 50% in third and fifth grade, well above that 50% mark. Seventh and eighth grade are both a little above, and then sixth grade is a little bit below. And again, if you think back to those cohort graphs, we start to see where some of these data points sort of start to intersect each other, in that in both reading and math, we saw a dip from fifth to sixth grade, and here in both reading and math, we're seeing that sixth grade is a little bit below that 50% mark, which tends to give credence to that idea that that's something that we really need to dig into and figure out what's going on. Switching to some of our high school measures, the PSAE. And again, this is very similar to the very first slide we looked at. The PSAE is our state accountability measure in 11th grade. Two parts to it. The first part is the ACT. So on day one, they take the ACT. On day two, there are work keys assessments in reading and math, as well as a Illinois State Board of Education science assessment. And those are melded together to give students a score, and that's how they determine, the state sets cut points and determines whether we're meeting or exceeding standards. In these graphs, this graph, we're looking at each of those subject areas and the percentage of our students that met or exceeded standards. And what we're seeing is we're seeing good growth from 2007 to 2009, and that appears to have leveled off in the last 2 years. If we zero in on just the ACT part of that, this is 37 years worth of ACT composite data from York. Again, what we can see is an upward trend, certainly, although there's a lot of ups and downs along the way. I want to draw your attention to that red dotted line. What that represents is the point where the State Board of Education made ACT a part of the state accountability assessment. So that's the point where it shifted from only a select group of students that were taking it as a college entrance exam in 2001 and before, to 2002 and after, where all of our juniors were taking the ACT. So we do see a dip from 2001 to 2002, which would be expected when we expand the pool of students that are taking that assessment. Since then, though, the ACT composite has climbed to the point where last year was the highest score we've ever had on the ACT, even though all of our students are taking it instead of a select portion of the students. This year we saw a decline in the ACT score, although at 23.5, that's still the third highest ACT composite we've ever had. And if we look at that drop compared to some of the ups and downs, it does seem consistent with some of the variability in that measure. And Dr. Johns is actually going to come back and talk a little bit more about that dip in a couple of minutes. In fact, right now.
So if we look at that dip, and it will be, what we have in front of you is the EPASS system. That's the Educational Planning and Assessment System. And that is composed of 3 tests. The first test is taken in 8th grade, the fall of 8th grade, and that's the Explore test, and that's signified by the blue line. The next test the students take would be the Plan, which is in the fall of their sophomore year. And we expect a degree of growth between those 2 assessments. And then demarcated by the purple line is the Prairie State ACT score, which they take their spring of their junior year. And then hopefully later on they'll take the ACT again and get a couple points or a couple tenths of a point higher, and that's usually taken some point after the Prairie State and upon graduation. So that's what that greenish yellow line is up on top. And that's an important score that goes in the paper as our average ACT for a class of whatever the class is. So it's still an important metric for us, but we really look at the blue line to the purple line growth. If you'll trace that purple line back a couple places to the class of 2010, you'll see the highest point that Charles just spoke of as the record-setting scores for for York, the highest scores we've had in 37 years. And while it's pretty impressive, we follow it with a year where the scores came down a bit, and that typically would cause some people to wring their hands. But I want us to slow down a little bit, because underlying all this is some good news that's really important and needs to be pointed out. And it comes back to that value-added concept that we've been talking about. With the class of 09, we saw from that Explore test taken in the fall of their freshman year to the PSAE administration of the ACT spring of their junior year, 5.4 points growth, which is good. It's more than ACT suggests should happen. Then with the following year, which was the record-setting ACT year, which I know now I've given this class a name, they had growth of 5.6. So we're seeing what I call quality improvement, continual quality improvement, where our value-added scores have now raised by 0.2. The great news is that continued. So the next class came in, they didn't have quite as high of an ACT score, but they grew 5.7 points. So they actually exceeded the growth of the preceding class. And the best news of all is this trend has continued. So we're getting nice, steady improvements year to year in the value-added gains. And this makes a real difference in students' lives, because as you know, the ACT score gets kids into schools. It also increases their chances for scholarships. So this is a real easy metric for us to look at in terms of value added. It's an easy way of computing value added and has real impact on children's lives. So it's something that we'll continue to track. The York uses a number of the EPASS assessments, and it is a way for us to really get real good data that we can in turn use as we develop curriculum and assessments to be used on a regular basis.
All right, on to our AYP our AYP portion. I want to give you a real quick refresher, just to make sure everybody knows what we're looking at. AYP is adequate yearly progress. It's what our state accountability tests are used to tell us whether we are meeting the series of improvements that are laid out in the No Child Left Behind law. The requirements that we have to meet is, first of all, each school in the district overall, as well as any subgroups, have to meet a requirement for the number of students that we test. The bar for that is at 95%, and we met that in all of our schools and all of our subgroups. The second piece that we have to meet is we have to meet an attendance benchmark of 91% for K-8 buildings. For the high school, we have to meet both an attendance mark and a graduation rate mark overall, and all of our schools met that requirement. The third requirement is the one that tends to get the most press, and that's our achievement results in both reading and math. And that's a series of steps that increases the achievement level each year. For 2010-2011, the achievement level of percentage of students that were meeting and exceeding standards in both reading and math was 85%. Demographic subgroups have to have at least 45 students in order for them to be counted toward a school or district making adequate yearly progress. If a school does not have 45 students in a particular subgroup, then that doesn't become a part of their AYP measure. And even if individual schools don't have that subgroup, there may be enough students that it adds up so that the district has that subgroup. So when you look at the district report card, there are a lot more subgroups than there are in any individual school. And that's because that 45 student mark remains the same whether you're looking at an individual building or whether you're looking at the entire district. Those subgroups are first expected to meet that 85% meet and exceed benchmark. If they don't, they can still make AYP through what's called a safe harbor provision, which was put in place with the idea that if these subgroups are making a certain amount of progress toward improvement, then they don't necessarily have to be accountable to that same 85% level. How that's calculated is we have to move at least 10% of our students, or 10% fewer students in the lower two categories, academic warning and below standards. And we also have to meet the attendance and or graduation target for that subgroup. So that subgroup by itself has to meet that target. As a district, 10 out of our 12 schools, all of our elementary schools, and 2 out of the 3 middle schools made AYP. So overall and all of their subgroups met all of those criteria. One of the middle schools, Churchville, as well as York High School, as well as the district as a whole, did not make AYP. And the next couple of slides walk you through the overall as well as each subgroup's performance and where we didn't make AYP. The color coding here is probably pretty obvious. The green ones are groups that did make AYP, either by meeting that 85% target or through Safe Harbor. The red categories are ones where we did not make AYP. So first we're looking at it as a district. And again, we have a lot more subgroups as a district than we do if you look at any individual building. If we look at York, in the red are groups that did not make AYP. The green is where we did. And again, the good news here is if you look at some of the data you had at the end of the packet that you got, some of those subgroups have made very substantial progress over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, that progress was not enough to meet the benchmarks set out by No Child Left Behind and AYP. And finally, Churchville, who failed to make AYP due to their IEP subgroup, students with disabilities. And now all of those things, all of those questions beg the question of what's coming next, what are we doing, where are we heading? And I'm going to turn things back over to Charles to walk you through some of that.
So I'm going to show you a chart that you actually have in front of you. But before I put it on the screen, it is purely there as a visual control chart. I really don't want you to get caught up in the infinitesimally small print or font. I want you to look at the color, because it shows for us where there is color is work that has been completed as a district, and where there is not color is work that needs to be completed. So it is just a way for us as leaders of the district, or when communicating with people who have to get this work done, here's where we're at in a quick view. So it's a visual control you might see in a factory, you might see in a really complex day trader's office, of a really quick way of looking at a set of data. So squint so you don't hurt your eyes. Okay. What we're trying to do, and what we'll continue to work on, is a process that we refer to as scale. Because scale is a systematic process that enables us to take all that we need to do, put the curriculum around it, and what we need to do are the standards and the benchmark levels that we want our children to hit, those target points that we need them to reach at different points in their academic career. That would be under standards and benchmarks, listed here as standards. Then we wrap the curriculum around it, finding the content and the context in which best to approach those standards and benchmarks. And then we get down to the key part, which is assessments. To really get high quality improvement in a school district, we have to have classroom level assessments to give teachers nearly real-time ability to see how well their children are performing. The problem is we've always had those kinds of assessments and quizzes and tests that we've all grown up with, but they were rarely benchmarked against standards and benchmarks that we start off with. And they were even more rarely made valid against external assessments such as the ISAT, such as the ACT. So we have to go through a systematic process where we realign everything so that we can have high quality information coming out of our classroom assessments. So that is why we follow this process, and it is fairly complex, keeping all the different moving parts together, and that's why we color code it and we fixate on where we don't have color. And that is where we're working in the next couple of years, is filling in these pieces. This is just early childhood to 8th grade. High school is far more complex, and I knew that this would be enough to burn retinas. So I stopped at this point. But this gives us that quick focus of where do we need to go next. And at this point, as you can see, we're kind of working our way diagonally to the south. I call it the southwest of the corner, the southwest corner of work that we have ahead. And it's heavy duty work. And that's work that's being performed during the late arrival time slots. We're going to need pull-out time for teachers to come together from across the district to work on these things, so we have common expectations and language across the district, and of course common assessments across the district as well. And we'll be doing a lot of work, as had been done prior to my coming to the district, during the summer as we've had in the past. So hopefully you still have your retinas intact. So at this point, Charles and I are available for questions.
Ms. Hirsch.
I'm going to start off with thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I've been sitting at the table for 2.5 years, and I have been asking for a growth focus and looking at how our students are doing in terms of their growth, not necessarily looking at ISAT data, which is not necessarily great assessment data. I mean, it is what it is. We have to comply with it, but I'm thrilled. I really am. The messages that I think that we've been sending are we want to focus on growth. I think that's the emphasis in all of education. I think it's the right place to emphasize. I think the other thing that we have been reinforcing is multiple assessments, which I'm thrilled to finally get access to the MAPS data and to be able to look at it from a high enough level that we can look at trends. I'm thrilled that we've implemented EPAS and we're getting there in terms of getting the data and looking at cohorts and looking at expected growth again. And I think the thing that's interesting is that we talk about using multiple assessments, right, not just one, to identify where there might be, in fact, a gap or something that we could look at as room for improvement. And I think in looking through the detailed data, it is clear that we have some areas that we can place some attention and place some focus. But I think we are going to do our families, we are going to do our students a great service by focusing on and publishing and talking about these assessments, as well as, of course, our teachers and supporting our teachers as they get complaints from parents saying, you're assessing my kid again and again and again. They have tests and tests and tests, and what does it mean? And I think we finally are at a point, and I so appreciate all the work that has gone in, Charles, to pull this together, right, and put this in a way that we can look at it at a high level and really start zeroing in on where we can improve and to celebrate our successes. The EPAS growth is wonderful. I'm really thrilled. I'm also very happy to see that when we are looking at all of the data, we are comparing it to national standards. We are not necessarily comparing it to ourselves. We're improving year over year. I think that is very important. And then with that glowing, support, thank you. I think there are some areas that we do want to take a look at. Mm-hmm. I think the most interesting thing, instead of diving into the detailed areas, 5th to 6th, 8th grade reading to the high school, the cohort, how all that aligns, I think, the chart is mind-boggling. I think I would like to hear from you what you would like the board to do with this information. I mean, I think that we make investments, we speak through the budget. Mm-hmm. We talk about how many meets and exceeds kids we have. We made a decision at the board table to increase our investment in the REACH teachers, the teachers that are focusing on those high-end kids. So I'd like to hear, we've made that large investment. How are we going to assess if that investment paid off in a year or 2 years? How do we continue to make good decisions at the board table in terms of investments to ensure that EPAS growth is there? Those are the things that we need to hear from you. How can we help you?
Certainly. I think continued oversight in areas of ensuring value-added gains and asking the questions, I know it sounds kind of ironic asking you to hold our feet to the fire, but keeping the conversation on those topics that have substantive importance on our students is critical, and helping both the district and the community stay focused on those most broadest reaching areas of improvement for the district first. And whether that comes up at the board table or in subcommittee, we need as a district, if we're going to be as efficient as possible with resources that we have, whether it be time or treasure, is that we have to work on areas where we have the broadest impact first, which means the standards alignment and the assessment work that our teachers are working on. That has to be as much as possible our primary focus. Recognizing that there is time when there seems to be pushback, when our teachers are away from the classroom while they're working on this work, and being able to communicate the value of that time when teachers collaborate together and have consistent understandings of the terms and the target points that we're trying to reach, I think is absolutely critical. And so helping us get that message across of, hey, community, this is really important things that our teachers are doing, and trust in us that we're holding them to some pretty rigorous work as we try to get through that scale process so we can have less reliance on the MAP assessments and have much more confidence in the day-to-day assessments that our teachers are using.
I would like to add too, obviously it's a whole new administrative team working with staff, moving down this path. But I think in pretty short order, a year, we may be coming back to you, and after we've had discussions with faculty, how are we going to reach the kids, for example, in our subgroups, that achievement-wise we are not bringing up to that AYP standard. And so working with faculty, sitting down and saying what kind of interventions can we introduce that might help those subgroups, and then coming back to the board and asking for those resources on a strategic planning kind of methods to say, here's what we need, here's a program we think is going to make a difference. We would certainly let you know what the data is that we're trying to accomplish over a 2 or 3 year period, so you know with your investment what are we hoping to get, and then reevaluating that. And so that's the kind of thing I think is a future discussion that the administration will be bringing forward to the board.
Mr. Collins.
I just have a couple questions. Overall, I'm giving you guys the new guys with short haircuts pass, because this is your first few months, or first few weeks on the job here. But I am kind of curious, explore to ACT growth, or kind of the first derivative of ACT scores. What is best-in-class growth?
9.4 points. You're looking at a Stevenson or Hersey High School.
Okay.
If you get beyond 5, you're looking really good.
Okay.
I think that we've got room. We're early in the process of aligning to the college readiness standards. I think we'll see pretty substantive improvement very quickly. We're in the early stages. At the high school level, the work is very complex. You're merging several sets of required standards together. So you're looking at content area standards that you want to bring in so that the children don't go to college without having enough context to be able to survive at a freshman level class. So you have those standards maybe coming from social studies. We'll be weaving in the college readiness standards as well. And then you have local standards that are important to a community as well that need to be woven in. So it's a very complex task of making those decisions of we have to soften our approach on these particular standards and supplement areas where we're a little weak. So it takes a little while, but it's a pretty clear pattern. When you start putting focus on it, you'll start to see change.
Our latest is a growth of 5.8 points, which I'm all in favor of the trend that we're seeing. How long do you think it takes us to get a 9 handle on that?
A 9 out of that?
Well,
probably about 7 years.
Okay.
And I'm speculating off of small sample size.
Okay. Where do we stand? You were talking about common standards and common expectations for each grade level. How is our work doing on power standards in the professional learning communities concept?
We're varied in different places, and Charles can give much more elaboration than I can because he's led the work, particularly in math. But we have several areas where we have completed the standards distribution for particular courses. What are we going to cover? And we have built our proficiency scales. Those are our quantitative targets. And we've begun the assessment piece. But we're pretty early on the implementation stage in most of the places that have even made it that far. So we're 2 years in.
Yeah, we're really one full year in. We've done that. If you think about that scale process, the standards work, which involves taking the Common Core standards, identifying our power standards, creating proficiency scales that clearly define different levels of achievement for that standard. That work has been done K through 8 in both reading and math. Other groups have started it using, since there aren't Common Core standards, using their own content standards. And again, if you look at that chart, most of that work has been done at the middle school level and will be trickling down to the elementary level in the other subject areas. Science is really on hold right now because there are new Common Core science standards that are expected next summer. So it really didn't make sense to start that work on old standards and then have to completely redo it the next year. So the work that we've done as far as standards and aligning to standards came out of the road mapping work that we did a couple of years ago, and that was the old set of Project 2061 national benchmark. So that's where you're seeing science on those scales. Now, as Dr. John said, the next step is that curriculum work, actually doing the implementation planning, actually looking at how those power standards and proficiency scales match with the curriculum materials that we have and the pacing that we're using and the topics that we're teaching, and changing that delivery to match our power standards and those proficiency scales. That work has been done in math at kindergarten and first grade. Again, a decision was made to start there in large degree based on the fact that there's still a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen with our accountability assessment. We know there are new assessments coming. We don't know what the state is going to do in the meantime. Are we going to be assessed on old standards to meet accountability, but be expected to move toward the new standards? So by starting at K and 1, since that group of students isn't tested, by the time they move up into the new assessment, we won't have have to worry about that with them, if that makes sense. Because by the time they hit third grade, we should be well on our way toward those new assessments. So K and 1 math, that work is done as well as the assessments. The remainder of the grades for math and English are beginning during this school year. Again, as Charles said, during those late arrivals, during pull-out, during that kind of time.
And I mean, it sounds like I'm going to ask a question that you probably can't answer based upon what you just said. But I mean, what do you think the realistic range of time frame is to get where we need to be?
To get through, to finish up the standards work in all of the subject areas, all of those grade levels, to do that curriculum piece, the implementation planning, and the assessment piece, we're probably looking at maintaining the same, what has been a pretty aggressive pace. We're looking at 2 more years to get to that piece. And then there are still pieces left after that.
Okay. And I'm going to encourage you not to be shy. If the board can provide you with something you need to get that done, please don't be shy about asking. And then just one last question, basically the same question about common assessments. I mean, obviously, you've got to get your standards in place before you can start writing common assessments. Yeah, but how far between the time you got the power standards in place to common assessments, what do you think that time frame looks like?
Once we have the power standards, those proficiency scales clearly defined, I think within the next year we can write those common assessments.
Okay.
And it depends to some degree on decisions that we make, whether those are going to be periodic benchmark assessments, whether they're quarterly benchmarking kind of assessments, whether they're end-of-unit assessments. And it also depends on the availability, the time and treasure that Dr. Johns mentioned. Do we have money in the budget for the curriculum work, which is good to hear that we have support for that. But also just the time during the institute days and early pullout. It is heady work, and it's
Sure.
stuff that takes time to work through.
And taking classroom teachers out of the classroom comes at a performance cost as well, because as we know, subs, even our best, are not nearly as high quality, don't deliver the same degree of performance that our regular classroom teachers do. So we were very mindful of trying to balance that out across time, getting the work done and not causing immediate impact to the performance of the current state. Students.
I do appreciate that it is a delicate balancing act. Thank you very much.
Mr. McDonough.
I've got to tell you, I'm very impressed. In a very short time, you've put together a real piece, and you've really told a story. More so in person. I feel so much better than when I walked in. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate the analysis that these two can do. I can't stay with them. My questions are a little simpler than that. The ISAT test. How many more years will the ISAT test be given?
You know better than I do.
I want to hear this question, this answer.
Here's what we do know.
Okay.
We know that 2014, 2015 is the scheduled time for new assessments to come that will be based on Common Core standards.
Mm-hmm.
We know that this year's ISAT will not change from previous years. It'll still be based on the old Illinois state standard. It's still correlated to those standards. There have been inklings that the state may try to provide some transition between our current testing on the old standards to the new testing on the new standards. But we don't know when and if that really is going to happen. So as it stands right now, it would appear that we will continue to have ISAT up until when the new standards come into place. What we really don't know is, are they going to provide us with a transition so that what they're testing keeps up with our transition to the new standards?
Yeah, I guess, do you start over from a data perspective? Is there going to be something that can tie these years and years of ISAT data to the new test in some way?
Well, and that really is, from a data perspective, that is a big issue. We had the same issue, in 2000, between 2005 and 2006, the state reorganized ISAT to the point where you could not compare 2006 and after data to 2005 and before, because it was apples to oranges. We're going to have the same thing. My guess, the new assessments look to be quite different from our current assessments. And I don't think we're going to be able to make that same tie. Now, we do still, the EPASS system will remain in place, which gives us a measure from 8th grade through high school. Our MAP testing will remain in place, which will give us a continuous measure to help us kind of bridge that gap between the old state accountability test and the new.
Did I hear you talk about a 9-point increase?
Yeah, I've spent every minute since saying that.
I support you on that one. And then the other question I had about the ACT and the PSAE. The ACT score is derived from that PSAE where everybody takes it. And is there anything in our ACT score that deals with multiple takers, or is that just separate?
You have the PSAE score that's indicated here. The ACT for the PSAE is that spring of the junior year version of the ACT that is a interesting cobbling with the Workies assessment in a science assessment. If I recall, that class of ACT is now the last administration of the ACT, or is it the best? Last. So what they do now is that greenish yellow line is the last time a child has taken an ACT. In most cases, it's a move upward, or the child takes it again until they get an upward move.
I guess, comparing apples to apples, is everybody reporting the last ACT? So when they brag,
everybody reports the last ACT because it's provided by ACT to the media.
Okay, all right. I think that's.
Mrs. Ebner. Looks that way, doesn't it? Sorry.
Okay, I just have a few questions, but before I ask, I just want to say thank you. This is exactly what I like to see, is a clear picture showing reasons to celebrate and also areas of improvement, which I really appreciate. Let's just show the good and the other.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. It's a very clear picture. And I just had a question about growth on the MAP test. We have so many very high percentage of elementary students that are above the national average on the MAP. And then for growth, because we have so many students performing so well, how do those students grow? It's hard to have those that such a large number of students grow plus 10 when they're at such a high level. So I just want to say that. I know.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond?
I'll do my best.
Okay,
it's a very complicated statistic. That blue bar represents typical growth based on scores of children at a demographic that is almost established with their first test. So if you had a 200 and I had a 150, your growth trajectory would be different than mine. And so that's whether or not you exceeded yours, versus and whether or not I exceeded mine. So you don't have a ceiling effect, even though you're much higher in your original score than I am. You're just measuring kind of on a binary level, did you improve above your
the
peers?
RIT score.
Above your original score. The RIT score is applied later, but it is a statistic that is tied specifically to your initial score. And so that children can have a variety of different initial scores. It's whether or not they exceeded the typical growth for children who had that original score.
Right, right. And I just want to say something too about our teachers. Our teachers having a chance to comment on students, so we're not, the two of you are not just looking at data only, like just getting the human factor involved also, because there's a lot of times there's a story behind numbers and map scores and why they went up or down. And do teachers have an opportunity to input on the human
in a
part?
variety of different ways, and it is actually kind of fun to watch. Charles and I met with every principal this summer before the school year started and shared their version of this data. And at some of these schools where the children, where they have children who are not meeting standards, the principals can tell you exactly who these children are and exactly the learning issues that they have, because we're talking a handful of kids. And it was really kind of remarkable to sit down, and they went name by name by name. We've got 5 kids at this level, and here's what's happening with them, and here's what we're doing for them. Additionally, as we develop and enroll our response intervention approach, that is an area where we start when we're dealing with individual learners or small groups of learners, where we start pulling in more anecdotal information so we have a fuller picture of a child's particular learning needs. So that is part of the process. It's later on that scale process where down at the bottom it says I and L. That's for instruction and for learner, where we start delving more deeply into the full picture of an individual learning problem.
I just have one last comment. I just noticed as I moved forward in this binder that the percent exceeds is decreasing as the grade level goes up. Do you have any comment?
I think that is clearly an area for additional investigation. In some cases, that follows a national trend, but that is an area for additional investigation. Certainly, we know we have something happening in 6th grade. Whenever you see dips in the trajectory of a cohort, we have to recognize that it's easy to overdetermine the cause. So we have that 6th grade dip. It's easy to say something must be happening at 6th grade, but we know learning is far more systemic than that, and the antecedents to that dip probably started much earlier. So we got to take some time and work backwards through those things to see what we can find out.
Mr. Bloom.
Not to be absolutely redundant, but thank you. This is exactly the fact-based kind of language we should be using to talk about this kind of stuff. My question is more around evolution. I mean, you guys only had a certain amount of time to do this. This is great data for the amount of time that you had. I think Dave touched a little bit on the why. I mean, this is the symptom. Talking more about the cause and the context of the data that supports what that is. So what have we done in the past? Those lines move like this, but we implemented a new reading program. So it was successful, not, and I think we're going to get some of that as we move forward. Also, I think Jim touched on the best in class. Just putting some of the bars on here as we talk about, particularly, the high school data, the PSA and all that data didn't have the national norm stuff on it. So it'd be nice to see where we are relative to where others are, particularly best in class, not just average. And then the last piece is just a level of granularity. I think, if what we really want to do is challenge every kid at their level to exceed expectations, we're looking at folks that exceed the national norm, but my question is, from an evolutionary standpoint, are you thinking about cutting this in? And we need to have the higher highs, but we need to have higher lows too. So, the bottom quartile. We're doing great with the top quartile. How are we doing with the bottom quartile? How are we doing with the middle two? Is that on the agenda?
On the agenda, and it was part of a conversation we had this summer with the elementary principals, is we actually have done such a remarkable job at the lower performing levels that is probably less of a focus than continuing to move up or upper levels, where we're looking at possibly raising up a whole level the set of standards that we use. Because when you're looking at 96% of your students or 95% of your students being above average, you essentially have a whole new baseline in your district. And so we're quickly approaching, if these trends continue, particularly at the elementary level, we're approaching that point where we have to make some tough decisions about we're going to leave the old set of standards and adopt a new set that are higher. The scary thing is we have all that work that's already in place, where these trends are, while we're trying to get this work done, we're already looking at incorporating higher levels of targets. And that's complicated to sort through. Especially, and Charles hit on a little bit, the fog that we are under now with the Common Core state standards and the assessments that are supposed to come with it have become politically a hotbed, have run out of steam in certain places, and certain delivery points that we expected information, particularly on the science standards, haven't come in on time. And so we're entering kind of a phase now where it's getting a little murky. So sorting through it, using things like the visual displays to keep everybody focused in the same direction, and counting on some assumptions such as the EPAS system will survive all of this, MAP will survive all of this, and we can continue and resort as the future unrolls.
Mrs. Stufen.
Thank you. And based on, my background, which is quality and process improvement and benchmarking and best practices and all, this is great for us to get a handle on identifying the best practices. And you can see from the data that, and I know that I sent a lot of questions to you ahead of time, so I won't go into the details, but, just from the bigger picture standpoint, it gives us an idea of where we are, what's the current state. Let's look at the targets of where we want to be. Let's compare ourselves against who we want to compare ourselves against, the national, or even peeling away that onion a little bit to say, kind of the national gets muddied, so do we want to raise the bar, and how do we do that? And it gives us a frame of reference to do the root cause analysis, right? Collaborating with the entire district to say what works and what doesn't work, right? Getting those feedback loops and continuous improvement. So that's really why I say thank you, because you have to start here, right? And you work with the buildings and the teachers, and that has to happen as well. So with that said, I'm looking forward to future follow-ups, as David said, even throughout the year, of not just the achievement reports, snapshot in time, how are we doing, but what are some of the best practice that we see? What are the root causes? How are we leveraging those best practices, right? And recognizing the teams that are doing that.
Absolutely.
You might not be able to address this, but I guess I really want to ask about the EPAS for York, only because of the AYP over the course of 4 years. Is this the appropriate time to get some insight as to what does it look like? What does it look like in the past? What are we thinking we need to change? Are we already in the path that it is increasing, even though we're missing AYP, or we're missing the targets? Yeah. So we are AYP. Can you give any insight?
I think the AYP targets at this point, knowing that the piece of legislation is really close to expiration, is probably not a primary focus at this point. It has the least to do with individual children's lives, and focusing on using the EPAS system to drive up children's ACT scores, which does have immediate impact. And we have a very high percentage of students who go on to college. We know that college attendance makes individual children's lives better, but also comes back and contributes to the overall health and prosperity of a community. I think that is where our primary focus needs to be. That's my recommendation. I think that we'll get closer. I think we'll get higher and higher Prairie State scores, but that's not purely ACT. That's a combination of ACT and work keys. We will see improvement. I'm not sure that we're going to hit the 92% that we need to have next year. That's going to be, just to give some context, there are 3 public non-selective high schools in the state who made AYP this year. 2 of them we know did so by safe harbor. There's 5 other high schools that made AYP. They're selective Chicago Public Schools, so they get to select which students they want. If anybody should make it, they should. So we're looking at less than 1% of the high schools in the state made AYP. The future for AYP in the state for high schools is obviously pretty bleak.
So really what we're looking at is, yes, we have a state metric that we need to look at, right? AYP, federal as well as state metric, right? But what we're looking at is just continuous improvement, every subject, every student. How do we do that? How do we do that across the board? And then to your conversation, to Shannon's question, you can even at the bottom of the scale get to individual contributors.
Absolutely. We're looking for, we'll have with our standards alignment and with data loops that we're building, the ability to improve off of that for all kids. And so raising the top up, catching the bottom performing students to bring them up is, it will be much more equipped to do it when we have the whole process completed. We'll be able to do that second loop thinking where we can continually improve.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up from me just on one from John and one from Jim. And I think Charles alluded to it. We can wait for the state to redesign the assessment. Or we can put in the power standards and start aligning our curriculum to the ACT standards that I think, I would agree with Charles. I think they're meaningful standards for kids. I think they're a good overall assessment of the kind of things kids should have when they graduate from Elmhurst to go out and be successful. So I would prefer we not wait for the state, that we start realigning our curriculum to those standards. And to Jim's quote, yes, you can do it by having 9-point growth. We can also do it by raising the Explore scores in the 8th grade so that kids are more prepared going into that for that college level. So that's that curriculum alignment piece that I think we need to focus on too, so that we're moving on both ends.
Ms. Hirsch.
Can I just ask you a logistics question? You can go back to your chair. I didn't mean to stop you midstream. But in the past, we've made, I think on board docs, we currently have the presentation that you just delivered, and as well as I think we have the executive summary of the report. And I think my impression, Mr. Collins, helped my recollection here, is that we have put the detailed assessment data, the ISATs, grade level, school level, building level, all those kind of things out and available to the public. My impression is that wasn't yet. I think I'd encourage us to consider doing that. The thing that is impressive about the new presentation of data is that it's really the stacked bar, which really shows 100% of our kids and where we are in terms of meets versus exceeds. And I think it's a much easier way to digest the data, and I would encourage us to consider making that fully open to the public.
Certainly, we'll put all three reports out, both the presentation, the executive summary, and the length of report. And also, in the near future, we'll have the state-provided school report cards that we put out as well.
Yeah, and just by past practice, and we can talk about this, I've always been making sure that the board sees the data first before we put it out to the public. So, once the board presentation, our mode of operation would then be, we're going to publicize it, but I want to make sure the board has it first and any questions that you have.
Thank you. Let's move on. We've had some patient visitors here. Apologize for the length of this discussion, but it's one of the most important things that we do talk about the entire year. Our workshop discussion topic this evening is a TIF tax increment financing discussion. Mr. Pernod.
Yes, as the board has requested, we are going to do about three things this evening. Number one is Chris has put together TIF 101. It's a class you'll be graded on after the end of this session. But it's basically just to bring everybody up to speed on the concept of TIFs, some of the key points in TIFs, how they operate, those kinds of things. Second part of this presentation will be to talk about the designation of future TIF areas in the Elmhurst community. And the third part is to look historically at TIFs from the past and what has happened to those. We do have, graciously, city officials are here and are here at our invitation and actually their suggestion to be here. So I want to thank the mayor, Jim, and his staff for being here this evening. So we're going to start off with Chris. Chris is going to take you through the 101 class. Take notes if you wish. Chris?
All right. Tax increment financing, TIF 101. First of all, we have the definition of TIF. It's a tool intended by state law to encourage the economic development. It's supported by the property taxes on the incremental growth, and it provides the support to the targeted areas that meet certain conditions. So we're going to talk about those targeted areas that meet certain conditions. We have The proposed redevelopment project area must qualify as either blighted conservation area or an industrial park conservation area, but it also must meet the but-for test, which we will talk about that a little more. So the criteria for blighted, there are 13 different criteria. In order to meet those criteria, the area needs to meet 5 of those factors. The TIF Act goes into some detail about those, but they are not very difficult factors for the TIF area to meet those factors. So we usually talk more about the but-for test, which the but-for test is an analysis to determine whether a TIF project or district requires public investment. To designate a new TIF district, a municipality must demonstrate that the physical and economic conditions in the area would not be addressed if not for the funding provided by TIF. So the but-for test, the public investment provided through TIF, effective, if not for the public investment, then effective redevelopment would not occur. So then the conservation area, in order to qualify for that, 50% or more of the buildings in the area have an age of 35 years or more. And such an area is not yet blighted, but because of a combination of 3, as far as the conservation area is concerned, you need to meet 3 of those 13 factors. So the revenues, how the public support is obtained through TIF. The source of the revenue is incremental growth, and so the EAV is frozen. This next chart is very helpful in showing how TIF revenues are obtained, and it shows how this is when a TIF begins. They freeze the EAV at that point in time, and then the incremental revenue after the TIF is created goes to the municipality, where the taxing bodies still continue to get their revenues off of the frozen EAV. So that for 23 years. After the 23 years, the parcels go back on the tax rolls. The first year that is considered new growth for a school district, and then the EAV is at that higher level after the TIF ends, and at that point, with EAV being a higher level, then the burden shifts back so the burden shifts more back on those taxing bodies or those parcels in the TIF area. TIF expenditures, these are reasonable costs are necessary with respect to the redevelopment plan and redevelopment project. There's some flexibility here as far as costs of studies, surveys, development of plans and specifications, implementation, administration of the redevelopment plan. So that's the costs and expenditures that the municipality can use for TIF. Porting happens when 2 TIFs are contiguous, and it's the power to use revenues derived from one TIF district to pay for redevelopment project costs in another redevelopment project area. It's the practice of taking TIF funds collected in one TIF district and spending them in an adjacent TIF district. So how is a TIF district created? There are regular steps here. The TIF district is proposed. A feasibility study is done. This is an optional step. The redevelopment plan is prepared. That's the longest part of the process. Then notice is given of a public hearing. A joint review board is convened, and the public hearing is held, and then the TIF district is established by passage of 3 ordinances by the City Council. So we're going to talk about the school district's part of this in the creation of the TIF district is a member of the Joint Review Board. And the Joint Review Board serves an advisory role, and in that role, the Joint Review Board checks is to see that the plan satisfies or meets the requirements of the TIF Act in the eligibility criteria of the objectives of the TIF Act. If the Joint Review Board recommends to approve, then the municipality just needs a simple majority. This slide is the city pointed out that it wasn't completely accurate. If the Joint Review Board recommends to disapprove, the municipality will have 30 days to resubmit. That's correct. But this last part, it says if municipality is not able to obtain a recommendation from the Joint Review Board. So if the Joint Review Board is neutral or doesn't make an adverse or a disapproval, then it is still a simple majority. But if the Joint Review Board recommends to disapprove, then you need the 3/5 vote of the City Council in order to create the TIF. The members of the Joint Review Board, there was also, you can cross out in the slides the Elmhurst Library. They are not a member. That's part of the city, is the library. So the library is not a member of the Joint Review Board. So the members of the Joint Review Board are the College of DuPage, District 205, DuPage County, the Elmhurst Park District, and then the township that the TIF is in. And so in the North York study area, it's in Addison Township. The city of Elmhurst is also a member of the Joint Review Board, and then a community member is selected by the majority of the other members of the Joint Review Board. Okay, from a school district perspective, this is a list of pros for creating a new TIF district. A partnership with the municipality. So encouraging the economic growth in the Elmhurst community. A property tax base. We're hoping that a TIF district will bring in an improved mix of properties. So additional EAV in commercial and industrial properties. And then there's always a possibility of an intergovernmental agreement that would make the school district whole. A list of cons for a new TIF district. Loss of new growth. New growth is one way a school district can exceed CPI in a tax cap, because new growth is exempt from that tax cap. So we would lose the opportunity for new growth from those parcels in the TIF district. A frozen EAV for the duration of the TIF district, if the other parcels outside of the TIF district increase faster than frozen, then that shifts burden more on taxpayers outside of the TIF district. There's potential for new students sometimes in a TIF, but I don't think that is the case with any of the study areas. Too long. The duration of the TIF district, it's 23 years with the possibility of extending it to 35. So that's a really long time for the EAV to be frozen. Too big, the size of the TIF area, some parcels in TIFs, including buildings that are relatively new and thriving sometimes. That just happens sometimes that the way the boundaries of the TIF are set up, that sometimes there are parcels that don't need to be in a TIF. How can a municipality make a TIF more workable for a school district? Making it smaller from the size of the TIF. That's what I was just talking about. Limit or concentrate the TIF on just the area that needs the most help. Remove parcels from the TIF that do not need to be included in the TIF district. Make it shorter, the duration of the TIF district. 23 years is an awful long time to have the frozen EAV. So a school district would like to see the municipality get the projects done quickly, achieve those development goals early, and terminate the TIF as soon as possible. Make a plan or commitment to release parcels throughout the life of the TIF. Avoid porting. Do not make two TIFs contiguous in order to take advantage of portability. That can just extend the TIFs even longer. An intergovernmental agreement is a possibility for making a TIF district more workable for a school district. Some examples of intergovernmental agreements that other communities have, where the TIF district, the municipality can share a percentage of sales tax on the new businesses as a result of the new TIF. There are intergovernmental agreements where there's a commitment to declare surplus in a new TIF. This is just a possibility as a percentage of incremental revenue in certain years through the length of the TIF. Releasing surplus from other TIF districts is a possibility for an intergovernmental agreement. Or terminating other TIFs early would be another way that a municipality can make it more workable. Or releasing parcels from existing TIFs is another way that that a TIF could be more workable for a school district. So at this point, after I've completed TIF 101, so I can open it up for questions on the TIF 101.
Mrs. Zebner. This is a quick question. Who does the but-for test? Is that an independent person, or is that somebody from the city of Elmhurst?
I think the but-for test is determined by a consultant for the city, I believe. Is that right? The city council.
Any other questions at this point? I just wanted one question before you went on. Does a municipality have to go for 23 years, or can they say, we'd like to create a TIF for 12 years?
They can end it early.
That
Earlier
doesn't
than
answer my
23,
question.
yeah.
So you have to start out at 23, you have to go 23. You can't say, I'm going to create it for 12, and still maybe end it early.
I'm not sure the answer to that.
What I'd like to do is, at my part of the presentation, introduce two components that we brought from Clean Town. First is Jeff Nando and Bob McKinney.
You're not getting caught on the mic here. The city manager is telling us, answering part of my question here by introducing city consultants. Shall we wait until you get up to the mic? Okay. Mr. McDonough.
I have a few questions. The TIFs in City of Elmhurst are all conservation areas, as far as I know. And then you say that only requires 3 of the 5 criteria to pass.
3 of the 13.
I'm sorry, 3 of the 13. 3 instead of 5.
And 3 instead of 5,
3
right?
instead of 5. The question is there is a but-for test on the conservation area as well?
Yes.
And the but-for test is, again, economic and physical improvements would not occur but for the intervention
Right.
to TIF. So this is kind of a lighter version. The blight has not occurred, but it's expected to occur. Is that the term? I think you said may become a blighted area. Do you have any information about that?
I agree with your assessment of the conservation area.
Okay. And TIF district doesn't need to have flat EAV growth. It just needs to lag behind the rest of the municipality. Is that right?
That is one of the 13 criteria, the lagging EAV.
Okay. But upon the establishment of the TIF, then the EAV is frozen at the time of the establishment of the TIF. My question is, what happens if there is negative EAV growth in the TIF district every year or after the establishment? Does that lower that base level, or does the base level stay where it is and the recovery to the base level is captured by the taxing districts? We can ask the
We'll ask
the
them
experts.
later, yes.
Okay, great. I just got to say, I really appreciate your final slide. TIF is a very strong tool, and in my opinion, it's a very effective tool. There are different levels of blight, and I'm not sure a 23-year straight TIF is, always the way to go. And I really appreciate those suggestions that you've come up with and ways to make this tool fit an application that we're facing. And I appreciate your bringing those forward.
Thank you.
I do have one question. It's your slide on the Joint Review Board. Our representatives, when it says District 205, is that Jim and John, who are on our intergovernmental council?
It changes every year because there's usually only one meeting a year for established TIFs, and basically we appoint whoever can go at the time.
So we appoint
it is
one
not
person at the-
necessarily the two who are on the intergovernmental, our 2 intergovernmental representatives. We can do it any way we want to. We can do that this year. We can make it those 2 if you like, or we can do whatever we want. Mr. Boone?
We get 1 vote?
We get 1 vote.
We get 1 seat.
1 seat.
Doesn't seem quite fair, does it? Since we've got a bigger interest. Go ahead.
So now that we have the TIF 101, we're going to talk about the study areas for the possible TIF district. The 5 study areas, and this was largely from the Kane McKenna report from June 2011 that discussed the 5 possible study areas that the city is looking at. The first one is the North York Street area. This area was recommended by the consultant for further study. It is looked at as a conservation area for TIF designation. The second one is York and Villette. This area was also recommended for further study. It's a conservation area for TIF designation. The York and Butterfield area is not recommended at this time. That's the area by Elmhurst, the new Elmhurst Hospital, and it has some issues with the outside of the city boundaries. The Lake Street area is not recommended at this time, and then the Riverside Drive area is recommended for further study, but this area is outside of the district boundaries. So this shows the current TIF districts, TIF 1, and then that's TIF 2 and TIF 3 over here. The proposed area, this is the North York proposed area, and then the York and Villette area. This is the York and Butterfield area. This Riverside Drive is the recommended area that's outside. There's just a small area that's inside the district, but it is not currently taxable property that is in our district on the Riverside Drive. And then the Lake Street area is up here. This one was not recommended, and this one was not recommended. So the ones that were recommended was the North York, the York and Villette, and the Riverside. But like I said, this one is not in our district. So the North York Street area.
Can we interrupt you just
Yes.
for a moment, Mr. Collins?
Do you have any idea if you took TIF 1, TIF 2, TIF 3, plus the proposed Lake Street, North York Street, York and Villette, and York and Butterfield, which is in the 205 area, what percentage of District 205 would then be TIF'd? Do you have any?
I haven't
maybe
done
I should
that calculation.
save that for later.
We'll save that for later. Go ahead.
All right. So the North York area, that area is primarily comprised of older buildings with commercial, industrial, institutional uses present. The consulting firm determined that 62% of those structures are 35 years or older, and therefore is eligible to be a conservation area. I've kind of divided in, and it's so long that the maps kind of require you to divide it, but two areas. We have the south of 290 and the north of 290. This was just a couple of sentences out of the Kane McKenna report saying that it's subject to review with the city attorney relating to the contiguity requirements near the I-290 where it's here, whether that can be one TIF or two TIFs separated. But so North York area south of 290 is contiguous with TIF 1 right there at the southern part of the TIF. So per this Kane McKenna report, this area borders the existing downtown TIF at the very southern end and has potential link both area planning efforts and potential TIF revenues due to the TIF Act provision that allows TIF revenues to be ported between contiguous TIF districts. So I'm first going to talk about this area, and I've got pictures now of this area south of 290. So this actually is in TIF 1, which is on the corner of York and North Avenue. This is the south side of North Avenue. I just wanted to get your reference point of where the start at the very southern end of the North York TIF is right here, and across the street is that church right there. This is where the two TIFs meet. And then next to the church is Loyola Medicine. The other side of the street we have Jersey Mike's right here, and the AT&T, and this is Elmhurst Memorial. And then we have the dentist office, which is right next to Elmhurst Memorial on the southern end of the TIF. Then on the west side of the street is Arby's. And some of these other businesses on York Street. And we're moving north. There's Amley's and the Jiffy Lube is across the street. And then there is the Ankle Foot Center, and then the big red brick building there is part of Liberty Village. Kathy Schrader took these pictures with me. I got to give Kathy credit because her and I went out for a couple hours and took pictures of the TIF area. This is across the street on the west side of the street, south of 290. And then that's the fire department there. And then we have the Convenient and Edward Jones and Fratello's, Burger King, and the Midwest part. And then that is Stevens Steakhouse and Firestone. So that's the area south of 290. And we go to the area north of 290. It includes larger vacant parcels that may have redevelopment potential depending on market conditions and city involvement. In addition, other existing uses such as the hotel or related commercial uses may have potential for reinvestment. Large-scale vacancies. 2 auto dealers are present. So I have some pictures of the northern part of the North York TIF. This is just north of 290. There's this certified, yeah. You know the whole area. I'll go quickly. All right. And I came back because the area goes a little bit west of York here. I don't know. Here's where I went. To the west where there's the little fire training area on that street back there. 1 block west of York. And that last one was on Grand Avenue. So then I'm going to do the next study area, which is York and Villette. The area occupies a potential yeah, we're not there yet. Yeah. The area occupies a potential priority area in relation to the neighborhood and community-based retail commercial services. Although the area has parcels with limited site size, its location along York Street and surrounding residential density offers users and tenants access to an important segment of the marketplace. Linkages to the Prairie Path are also amenities that could be built upon in relation to a coordinated area plan to enhance pedestrian flows and neighborhood use. And here is a map of the York and Villette area. I have another slide similar, but it has the names of the places there. This study area would be difficult to develop without centralized coordination. This is because most modern development standards call for larger parcels with coordinated parking, access, egress, and streetscape or landscape uniformity. Larger scale redevelopment options appear to be limited due to the size of parcels and existing uses. I just have a few quick photos of this area. This is that building which is at the very south end. At the farmer's market that day. This is a rather new strip mall over here. Mama Maria's Pizza. This actually is not in the TIF, the PNC Bank. And this is not in the TIF either, but it's a new building. This is right along the railroad tracks. That's York and Villette. And then I'll go just show these other slides real fast. York and Butterfield study area is not recommended at this time. This is the Elmhurst Hospital, and that's the little blue areas outside of, I think that's unincorporated. And then this is the Lake Street study area. That's also not recommended at this time. And then this is that Riverside Drive study area. We went over there to take pictures, but there wasn't, there was a pumping station, but there wasn't anything along that creek as far as parcels that are currently taxpayers. So that area is, there wasn't anything over there at this time. So that's it. So at this time, unless there are questions for me, I'm going to turn it over to the city for the presentation on the history of the TIFs in Elmhurst. So Jim? Good, how are you? Good to see you.
Good evening, President Deroni, Vice President Hirsch, Secretary Collins, and the entire Board of Education. We appreciate your time and commitment to Elmhurst and to District 205. As a proud serving member and a product of District 205, I stand here beside you driving the school bus of economic development. Having been to York High School myself, having three personal children in the district at Lincoln, Bryan at York. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, Steve Morley, my classmate at York, could not be here tonight, but I think we are probably the youngest city council ever in the history of the city, all of which, virtually, I believe, 6 out of 7 wards have children in Elmhurst Public Schools. So we take a very serious interest in economic development, and I would look to us as a team in this, as a partner in this process. We all have a vested interest with our children. District 205 is a pillar of the community. Probably one of the most compelling reasons to purchase a house in this town is because of our schools, and I realize that, and I know you do as well. So, so we are here eagerly before you to help us in this process. We have in our comprehensive plan, we originally identified 9 areas of redevelopment. The consultants that we've hired narrowed that to 5, and we see that of those 5, 3 are definitely worthwhile to pursue.
two that were identified, we are hoping it will work on their own. By the hospital, which has almost a $500 million incentive of new development there already, we're hoping that will work its way on its own. And the same, not quite the same, but we're hoping Lake Street will work its way out as well too. So these three areas, and I happen to be from the north side, moved there in 1976, have been through good times and in bad times, and have not seen much growth. So I think you're going to see that hopefully in the end. We definitely will pass the but-for test, and we will keep what is currently coming in and save that from going down. And that's my biggest concern as mayor, to grow the tax base. We have a great city manager who's, one of the reasons why we hired him was because he was a pro on economic development, came out of Wheeling, I think a restaurant row on Milwaukee Avenue, Manuka, where he realized an immense growth in those communities. So with that, Mr. Grabowski, we'll take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I start, I want to thank you for having us here. Thank you for letting us participate in this presentation. Dave, thank you and your staff. And I want to introduce a few people that came with us this evening. From our staff, Tom Trezine, who's our Assistant Finance Director, who gets all the credit for this presentation because he put it together. And thanks, Tom, for doing that. And then the other two gentlemen are consultants with Kane McKenna, and that's who we've been using through this process. To the left is Chuck Biondo, and to the right is Bob Rashlicki. And when we get to the question portion, if there are any, I'd like to bring them up as they have significant expertise in this. And also, before I get into the presentation, I'll answer the two questions that were asked earlier. Mr. Roney, I believe you asked if there could be a lesser term set. And the TIF term is limited to 23 years, but it can be set to lesser terms, but is determined by the economics of the plan that go into it and how the TIF is doing, how it's working, how the development is happening. Obviously, right now we're in kind of a lull, let's call it, for development, so things aren't moving as quickly as the plan originally considered that it would. It's usually, though, in the TIF's best interest to set the maximum number of years and then end it earlier if all the goals are met. So that's why 23 years is generally the term that's set.
But it doesn't have to be.
It does not have to be.
Thank you.
Correct. And then, Mr. Collins, your question about how much the percentage of EAV is, and with, I believe your question was the 3 current plus the 5 study areas, that would be 8% of the city or 7.5% of the school. With the 3 current and the 3 proposed, it would be 5.8% of city EAV and 5.4% of the school EAV. And again, thanks to Tom for calculating that out. Appreciate that. So the history of TIF in Elmhurst. It's a great success story, and there are 3 districts, as Chris had pointed out. The Central Business District is TIF 1, established in 1986. TIF 2 is on Lake Street, and it was established in 1993. And then third TIF is at the corner of Route 83 and St. Charles, established in 1996. And we'll get into the specifics of each one during the presentation. As shown on the screen, the current EAV, or excuse me, the current increments of each district are up there. And because of time constraints, I'm going to move through this a little quick because you have it in front of you. Certainly if there's questions afterwards, we can get back to that. But you can see the increment that's been generated just for 2010-11, our current budget year, and then the cumulative over the life of the TIF. Included in that for TIF 1 is an SSA, which is a special service area, and that has nothing to do with any of the taxing bodies. What it is, it's a self-tax that the property owners put on themselves, and it's used for improvements within that district. Now, TIF 1 also has a sales tax TIF on it. Again, that does not affect District 205. It affects the state and the county, I believe. Just the state. Thank you. Here's a very telling chart, I think, that shows the growth in each of the districts. The bottom line indicates citywide frozen value with the frozen value. Excuse me, the citywide frozen value. The pink line is the second line up is the overall city EAV, and then the three, the maroon, the yellow, and the teal are the TIF districts. So we get to TIF 1, which again is a central business district, established in 1986, and with a sales tax district overlay on it. So you get the general boundaries of it right there. These I'm going to move through rather quickly, through the adoption, the goals that were set in the redevelopment plan, the redevelopment tools that were used for that. And I think this is another telling slide because it indicates the projects that were completed in TIF 1. And I'd like to go through a list of those. Those include Crescent Court, Market Square, Museum Square, the Adelaide and Larch parking decks, the CVS Panera building, Jewel, York Theater, Kovac Eye Center, numerous retail shops, the building that has Caribou Coffee at the bottom, and the Elmhurst Point and Harris Bank building. Were all completed through the use of TIF funds in one manner or another. It could have been land acquisition, it could have been a retail grant, but in all three of our TIFs, the primary tool that we've used is land acquisition. In 2004, that TIF was amended, and that was it was spurred by a request from District 205. My understanding is there was a budget shortfall, and we brainstormed with the district on how that could be resolved. And my understanding there was about $1 million gap in the budget, and the way that it was resolved were some properties were released out of the TIF, which allowed the taxes to be collected, and that made up for the budget shortfall. Again, my understanding of that. In addition to that, it was extended 12 years to a total of 35 years. And what that did, it helped make up that gap, is when you put together the economics of the plan, you say, okay, we're going to have X amount of development, it's going to generate Y amount of increment, and that increment's going to be used back in the TIF district to help the other developments. If we take parcels out that weren't anticipated to be taken out, we lose that increment, so that's why the TIF was extended to 12 years, was to make up for that shortfall. So there were 9 parcels that were released in 2004, and then this slide shows that there were additional properties that were released in 2006 and 2007 as well. So this slide indicates the released and remaining parcels in valuation, and the next slide shows it in a graph form. And if you can see in these years, back to the microphone, if you look, there was less than 50% of the EAV left in the TIF right now. Oops. Future projects in TIF 1 anticipated streetscaping, cultural campus interconnection, parking lot and parking deck improvements, utilities, more land acquisition, public-private partnerships, facade program, retail business grants. Those are all programs that are ongoing. And then there's 2 significant projects that we're looking at. One is the Addison Street project, and it indicates on the bottom left corner, that's the Larch Garage that was recently built, and then in the further to the east is the Addison Street redevelopment, the building that will be we have a public-private partnership agreement already, and hopefully that'll be moving forward shortly. On the right side of that is the Hahn Street project. That one, as I said, indicated before, some of the projects are stalled because of the current economic times. That's one of them, but it's one that I hope and I know we'll get moving soon. So on to TIF 2, primarily Lake Street on the south, I-290 on the north. Again, I'm going to move through these quickly. The adoption as to why they were TIF'd, the redevelopment plan, and again, more of the redevelopment plan. Skipping to the completed projects in TIF 2, the Superior Ambulance Office Building, Murnane Paper Building, Elmhurst Toyota, Jaguar BMW, AmeriSuites, and West Suburban Bank, all projects that came about because of the TIF, in addition to a couple of others. So the property tax increment generated, you can see the current valuation, $16 million. It's adjusted for the frozen, the revised frozen valuation. And so the total increment right now, $11 million in that TIF. Future projects, public-private investments to be determined, and infrastructure improvements to be determined. And I want to point out at the bottom of that slide that in May of 2010, a surplus distribution of $615,000 was determined, and of that, District 205 received $434,000 of that surplus based on tax rate. And lastly, we have TIF 3, which is at the northeast corner of St. Charles and Route 83. I think everybody recognizes that as the Coles, Dominic's, Portillo's area. Again, I'm going to move through these. Adoption was based on a number of criteria. The redevelopment plan had a number of goals in it. Significant change from 1998 to 2008, as you can see. 1998 was our public works facility, generating zero tax dollars for any of the districts. Now generating significant dollars for all the TIF districts with the shopping center, and it allowed us to relocate our public works facility to a more industrial area where it's better suited. Again, the increment generated shown here. And in TIF 3, we did a unique agreement. We agreed with the district to give the 3% growth distribution. Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was capped at 3%. It was CPI not to exceed 3%. So these are the distributions that we've given to the district out of the TIF since 1996, total of $524,000. Future projects for that TIF are land acquisition. Coincidentally, a project that we talked the other morning about. Our public works garage is in the top green portion. The city owns the land. The other green portion, we're looking to purchase the brown portion in between. And as part of that, we hope to accommodate District 205 maintenance facility or vehicles or something like that, to be determined in the future. But that's one of the goals that we have in expanding the public works facility. So again, the future of TIF in Elmhurst, there's TIF 1, 2, and 3, and then as Chris indicated, we are looking at 3 additional districts. And all of this information, plus probably more than you'd ever want to read, is on our website, and we encourage you to go there and look at it. Right now, where the other 3 districts lie is that the Development Planning and Zoning Committee of the City Council met last night. They discussed the report that Kane McKenna had put together recommending the 3 of 5 TIF districts. And their recommendation to the City Council is to consider inducement resolutions, feasibility resolutions, and a contract for Phase 1 planning of the TIFs. That does not obligate the city in any way to the TIFs, just so everybody knows that. What it does, the inducement resolutions allows us to recapture any costs that may be, any expenditures that may happen before the TIF is established. The feasibility resolution is a resolution that we'll send out to all the taxing bodies to let them know that we're considering these in TIF areas. And then the Phase 1 will get into more detail about which parcels really truly belong in the TIF and qualify. What the preliminary study looked at was a general area. And as Chris indicated, there were some parcels that were carved out that don't meet the criteria. This will get into a real in-depth study of what meets the criteria in the 3 proposed TIFs. So again, none of this obligates us to creating the TIFs, but it's the first step in determining whether or not it's in the city's best interest. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Mr. Bloom?
How do you determine the size? I mean, I guess from the standpoint that it sounds like there's a certain amount of money you think you're going to need to do the development, and you draw the map around the parcels to get the EAV on some assumed percentage growth to get you the revenue you're going to need to do it.
No, what we do is in the comprehensive land use plan, there were, as the mayor had indicated, there were 9 redevelopment areas that we looked at. So let's take the North York Street. In looking at that, it was determined that the area needed some help, needs to be redeveloped. And so what Kane McKenna did in their preliminary study was to then look at that to see what kind of tax base it is, and then what they'll do in the phase 1 is further look at that to see what kind of increment could be generated, what kind of projects could go in there, and then that determines the budget, so to speak, or the increment that's going to be developed and what can be done after that.
I guess you figure out how much is there, and then you figure out what you can spend
right
based on that.
Okay. Is that fair? And I'm going to ask Chuck and Bob to come up now as well to help me answer these questions. They're certainly more experts than I am.
Typically, when you're looking at a TIF, how much of the revenue from that TIF are you relying upon the new development to be funded by taxes incrementally on the new development in the EAV versus the surrounding businesses? I'm guessing you throw a loop around it, you put some stuff there that has some current cash flow associated with it, and then some other things that will come online later.
Sure.
What kind of balance? I mean, I guess theoretically you could draw a TIF around just the stuff that you want to redevelop. I mean, when you look at that, typically, do you have a rule of thumb on how you mix that?
Typically, Bob Richlicki with Kane McKenna. For the greater part, when you're looking at the TIF in terms of the bulk of the revenues as it relates to the payment of the redevelopment costs, based on our experience, and we've worked on over 200 of these things, most of it really comes from the newer redevelopment. The natural growth or growth is associated with the remainder of the properties will make some contribution primarily in the early years in terms of looking at that as maybe funding some of the early professional costs or study costs. But usually the bulk of the increment, it's a math problem. Usually where the base is lower or your density is going to be greater over that base is typically where you're going to get most of the cash flow associated with the TIF. And in each district, it's going to vary. It's going to depend on market interest in certain sites. And again, how low is the base versus what are you going to put on that property in order to generate the redevelopment or the increment. And if the city or municipality's done their job right, that's what I'm saying, in most of the cases, you're going to see the bulk of the increment being derived from the new development or new redevelopment. I mean, that's really the nexus of the program.
Okay, so that would reduce the need to include other adjacent properties that are already there.
Well, but then there's two things in relation to the math problem. There is a contiguity issue in terms of
the TIF has to, you have to be able to draw,
you got to be able to,
draw a line.
right, you got to be able to do that. And there's also an engineering issue we found in some cases as it relates to infrastructure. The good news is TIF is there to help you with redevelopment. Bad news, it has to be inside the TIF district. I mean, based on the requirements of the Act, your geographic boundaries are basically going to determine where you could spend the money. So if you're identifying a bunch of donut holes or cutting properties out, you got to look at is it contiguous? I mean, does everything touch each other according to the requirements of the Act? And secondly, are we able to pay for things that basically benefit the area? It's, as Jim indicated, a starting point for this was not a vacuum. It was looking at the city's comprehensive plan as it related to these bubble areas or areas that were identified as important to the city, not only aesthetically and from a community standpoint, but also economically in terms of conservation of assets, I would argue. You're looking at areas that have made a contribution to the city in the past and to the other taxing districts. And also the idea is how can we either, A, conserve them or improve upon them in terms of redevelopment.
Do you have any idea on the kind of the range of the dollars you're targeting to do this in each one of these areas? I guess I'm asking that same question again, but I'm thinking that if you've got a vision. I mean, you'd love to see what's there. I mean, you've got a price tag in a range on that vision. I mean, can you guys share any of that
Typically,
with
as
us?
part of developing
This
the
plan.
redevelopment plan, we propose, with the city's assistance, the plan would propose a budget. And I think it's important, and perhaps many of you aren't totally up to date, or not up to date, but totally knowledgeable of what is in the plan. Typically, the plan is written in a macro format. It's not written in a micro format. I mean, there are some occasions where it will be a project-driven TIF for one or two projects. But most TIFs, particularly in this economy, are not driven by a project because there's not much going on. So the idea is to use the tool as a mechanism to attract development to the area and use it as a stepping stone to continue further development in the area, which is another reason why donut holing and excluding properties make it more difficult for that development to continue on in a coordinated fashion throughout the entire district.
Sure, I'm just trying to growth is great for our town, and we need growth to make our town good for all the citizens. We send our kids to school, but we also live here. So, and I get that, but I'm just trying to avoid a blank check scenario where we can tell our constituents, hey, you know what, we're doing this, we're taking one for the team. This is the right thing to do. We're doing it because of between X and Y, and we got to have it here because we got to get. I mean, that's what I'm trying
And you're
to
going to be able to comment on that. We don't have, I think, the data for you right now because this is at the very preliminary stage, but if the projects do go forward in terms of the process, at the Joint Review Board, those kind of questions you asked are exactly what would have to be demonstrated to not only you but the other taxing districts in terms of, okay, this is what we think we have our arms around in terms of a budget, and here's what we have our arms around in terms of how we think we're going to repay it. That detailed information would be available at the next steps of the process, exactly that.
And if I could just add one comment in terms of the cash flow, the way that, as Chris explained, the way that the TIF works, the tax base that the school district has now remains throughout the life of the TIF. So what the tax dollars that you're getting off of it right now will stay the same.
Sure,
they can.
They're also at like 20-year lows right now. So I mean, that's the only other. I mean, we need to find a way to work together.
Absolutely. And I think we've demonstrated that over the last 20 years or so with TIFs that are in place, and so we want to just bring that out.
Mr. McDonough.
I learned last night that these are not the TIF areas, that these are the study areas. Wasn't particularly clear from the things that I'd read before that. I was following along with what you were doing in the newspaper, and that's not always the best way. So I just would ask that I mean, this is wonderful, and thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us, what you're doing. I have pages and pages of questions here, and I did talk to the mayor, and I talked to you, Jim, the other morning about other TIF-related issues, but I just want to urge you to please come share with us as this progress. Well, let me ask you, what's the best way for us to learn what your plan is, how it's evolving? I see 4 to 6 months to do the redevelopment plan. How would we keep track of that? Should we come to your committee meetings? Will you brief us? Is there some way that we could communicate? What's a good vehicle for communicating between the two bodies? Because I think there's a real risk if you're doing things and we're not getting the information, we can't evaluate what you're doing. Understanding our role is limited, that you're not asking us to approve anything. You're coming to tell us about it, and we're part of the community discussion. And TIF is a huge community discussion. Does a community want to invest in its future in a way? And the question is, how much and for what? So I'm trying to promote that through good communication. I'm open to whatever suggestions you guys have.
First of all, I think the main point I'd like to make is that the city has made it clear right from the get-go that they want this to be as transparent as possible. They've asked us what can be done that doesn't need to be done. The feasibility resolution is a good example. That's an optional action on their part. And once they do it, it sends notice by a copy of that resolution to all the taxing bodies that this study is being considered. As I'm sure you're aware, the statutory process provides all kinds of checkpoints in terms of public hearings, JRB notices, notices to taxing bodies, et cetera. In terms of what, in addition, can be done to that, I mean, it would be a decision for the city to share drafts of the redevelopment plan as it moves through the process. I mean, it's nothing that's cast in stone, nor is it, is it under the table. So to the extent that we put a first draft or a second draft out and the city's willing to share that, you could certainly be made part of that process.
Transparency is one thing. I'm looking for consensus. We're differently situated, the city and the school district, when it comes to a TIF. The benefit, in a pure TIF, without any intergovernmental agreement, is simply we'll get our return in 23 years. There's also a shorter term cost, and that's the growth, both new growth and incremental growth, and that all gets swept into.
But you recognize, though, that the new growth issue is really only a one-year issue in terms of coming out of it.
No, I'm saying
new growth in general.
Yeah, well, and this is one of the things. I have a list of things I'd like to know, and one of them is the new growth in the area whenever it comes up. We need to know what's been the history of new growth, because that will be forfeited into the TIF district. That was something that, that history, if you can use it as a projection for the future of what the market would have created in an unsubsidized area, that is the cost, the direct cost to the school district. And no, nobody can look in a crystal ball. Real estate market has proven that it's, impossible to say. From what I can tell, just looking at the North York one, 10% of the commercial new growth of the district was in Addison Township. How much was in North York? I don't know. That's kind of information so we can help us evaluate. What's the history of new growth in the area. Give us 4 or 5 years. Reach back before the crash of real estate prices. For commercial industrial, it was 2007, 2008, I believe. Yeah. And for residential, we're still going down. Yeah. And that's not going to happen for 5 years, but commercial industrial is going to come back. I'd ask a question before about whether the baseline changes as the EAV drops if you establish a TIF in a declining market.
The base is the base, essentially. I mean, that's implemented
so the
by the
district
county
would
clerk.
Recover the increment between the base and the actual
If it dips
EAV.
Below the base in a given year,
Yeah.
there's no increment.
Okay.
But if things get better, that base is still there 5 years from, let's say, the dip,
Right.
and if it goes above that at a certain period 5 years later, that baseline is still there.
Getting back to this idea that the city is differently situated, and the big thing for me is sales taxes. If you use a TIF to drive a sales tax income flow, it's a great deal for the city, because the city's loss of EAV is offset by sales taxes, which happen very quickly if you're doing a retail TIF. Those taxes come in year 1, year 2, year 3, and they immediately make up for the loss of EAV. We don't get any sales tax. So there's a short-term cost to us. The gain is in 23 years. Is there a way to divide that immediate income flow to share it in such a way that the short-term costs of the district would be counteracted, and the district would then be sharing both in the short-term upside as well as the long-term upside, and not giving only short-term costs?
Yeah, and I can't say that any of us are prepared to answer that question.
No, I'm not asking for a commitment. I'm saying that's the sort of idea. It was on Chris's last slide. One of the many ideas that makes a TIF work better for a school district. Our job is to educate kids, not be involved in a real estate development enterprise. We heard that at our last meeting, and I take that seriously. At the same time, this school board approved EPERT reports that took 18 teachers out of the classroom. This district can't afford any loss of short-term revenue. It can't stand any more than it's already given up. I went to open house, sat in a class. Somebody asked the teacher, and the teacher said there were 34 kids in that class. These are the real world things that are happening because of the financial situation that the district's in. And so I'm looking for anything that we could do in an intergovernmental agreement that would reduce or cover those short-term costs, becoming, a partner, if you will, in a way that benefits both parties. What's happening in TIF 3? What a great idea. Share with the district so that the district is getting return on this. And just from that framework, like to look at any of the TIF ideas. And so just, a couple suggestions that I have. I know we're running late, and I don't want to go too long here. One thing would be, and I already said it, consider the history of new growth in the proposed areas in determining the adoption of the maps. Second one was to look at these differing sources of revenue and look at sharing them. The third thing would be an active participation of the district in the development of the redevelopment plan, so that it's not a sales tax-based thing if there's no sales tax sharing, so that it's an EAV thing in that case. Or if there is sharing, then the district can be a participant to look at the plan as well and pursue its goals. And the fourth one, which I think is important if we're going to enter into some sort of cooperative relationship, would be to consider defining, at least in an initial fashion, the market change, the metrics, the data points or triggers where TIF would either pay out surplus or it would release properties or would simply terminate. These don't have to be stated with a specificity that you can't revisit in the future, but some targets. I think it's real important if this is a community decision to reinvest in some way. I think the community has to know what's being invested. I look at the for the first time today, I looked at the 1986 redevelopment plan, and it is fairly detailed in some of the projects it proposes. I think that's an important commitment to us and to the city to identify those sort of landmarks where we need to know where we're going so we can know when we got there. I know you've said that before, Chris. So I just went on too long. I'm sorry about that, but I'm just wondering if we could work together on this in such a way that's mutually beneficial.
I think the previous mayors and councils are kind of living proof that we have worked together. The school district has come to the city and needed dollars in the past. Releases have been, carve-outs have been made. Even look subsequent to 2004, many parcels were released out of the downtown TIF. And I'm proud to say in my first term and my second year, when there was a surplus, which was never done before, I sought to the council for approval to release that surplus. We had nothing going on in that TIF, about $650,000, and knowing your circumstances were tough, and knowing that we didn't have a project that was imminent, we declared a surplus. And so I think that kind of sets the tone to us working together, and maybe we build was that a 3% CPI deal like what was done with the St. Charles and 83 TIF. Those are all things that I think are open and on the table, so that we can have a win-win here. So, but in the meantime, we have 4 vacant car dealers. We have buildings that have no employees. And I know that we're graduating 600-700 kids out of York every year, and they're going on to tech schools and four-year schools and masters, and I look at what happened with Lake and Walnut, where we had an old liquor store that I used to actually stock shelves at, which is now home to 1,600 employees. Superior Ambulance employs many York grads, including my brother, who's a paramedic. Those are the true accomplishments I think that we can take credit for. And hadn't we done those things, hadn't we put those tools in place, but for, we would not have had what we've had. And I think that's just, it's very, very important to realize, and we're here to help. So we're here to cooperate, and we definitely would like you to be a partner in the process. So,
Just a couple questions about that. That TIF 2 release, was that the first year that there was a release from TIF 2?
Tom, do you?
There was a surplus.
Or, I mean, surplus release, or surplus payment.
There was a release way back in the original 2004 governmental agreement.
No, I meant the first release from TIF 2.
Correct. That
Okay.
was the first full release. There was an earlier release that coincided with the 2004 intergovernmental agreement. The city was trying to get the school district $1 million. The property that was released for this fiscal year only came in from one of the payments, so about $500,000. So we did release surplus of TIF 2 to make up that other $500,000 for that first year of the
Okay. When was the debt retired on TIF 2? 2 years. Okay, so it makes sense. You'd release as soon as your debt is paid. I'd like to look at that sort of things. He brought up the 2004 agreement, and I don't want to take everybody's time if there's not enough time to talk about it, but there were commitments made in 2004. On the slide, the first item is the make-whole agreement, and there were actually 2 make-whole agreements in the 2004 agreement, but I don't know if we have the time to talk about it tonight.
We don't tonight, but I would make the suggestion that we sit down, school district and city officials, and talk about that 2004 agreement, talk about the make-whole portions of it, to be sure that what was set up in that agreement is actually happening. There has to be some figure massaging and some assumptions and some hindsight where we can actually see what happened and some things that we need to project. But we're coming close to the time where this sales tax district is going to end, and we can tell, I would think, by looking backwards and seeing what EAVs were, whether or not the school district has come out ahead, been made whole, what is happening with that 2004 agreement. We can't get into it tonight, but I would hope that we would sit down together at a future time and talk about that. John?
I just want to point out the agreement itself calls for an annual get-together between the district and the city to discuss numbers and procedures for the surplus release. Section 4 and Section 5. So it's already there. We just need to, I think, follow through with that as this date comes up.
It also talks about the school district sitting down to talk with the city about any future projects from those areas, which I'm not sure has happened either. So I'd like to suggest that we take a look at that as well, just to be sure that we are on the same page with what has gone on in the past. Anybody else before I have a couple of questions? Ms. Hirsch.
I'm not going to be nowhere near as detailed as my friend, Mr. McDonough here. I am on achievement, right? Because that's what we were elected to do. That's what we ran to do, was to focus on academic achievement and teaching kids. And we are not experts in development, but we are heavily reliant. I mean, the state is not coming through with their funding. The feds are cutting back on their funding. 90% of our funding comes from our tax base. We need to protect every dollar that we can. I'm not saying that I'm not in support of smart development, right, to improve our overall EAV, but I am very cautious when it comes to freezing and putting at risk the dollars that we are watching very carefully. Okay. One question I did have that concerns me, I think we as a board are really trying to focus on metrics, focus on targets, do an honest assessment of where we are, of where we want to be in 5 years and 10 years in terms of student assessment and achievement and those kind of things. And I think we're so focused on that anytime we look at something that comes outside of the realm of student achievement and the things that we're looking at, we're also looking for metrics and to see and to have a more clear picture of what the redevelopment plans are and how are we going to know if they are successful, and when do we say, job well done, job complete, time to release, get back on the tax rolls for all of the other governing bodies. And I think a more thorough investigation and discussion, and I think we're on the leading edge of looking into and doing research on inserting new TIFs. One of the concerns that I have is the concept of porting. And I'm not sure, now I'm speaking as a taxpayer, not necessarily representing the 205 board, but I have concern about porting from one TIF to the next and having it be continuous, having the new TIF be continuous, and there's not a lot of discipline of where that money is going to be used and what it's going to be used for. So I think I'm happy. I'm thrilled that you came to us, that we're having these discussions. I don't want to have discussions where we're sitting at our board table and we're yelling at you from across town, and your city council members are talking about TIFs and talking about development, and we love the press, but let's meet face to face. Let's talk as governing board to governing board. Let's really roll up our sleeves. And, I'm happy without having it be the full board. This board last week decided and started implementing a move towards a committee structure where we are going to be looking at taking board members and assigning particular areas that are of interest and importance to the board. And not that they're decision-making bodies, but they are, the committees are going to be looking in, doing some research, reporting back to the full board and making recommendations to the full board. So, I don't know, this is, first meeting since we worked through the committee structure. I mean, I'm happy with asking our finance committee to work closely with the city on those connections, on talking about, the TIF development, looking at what it's going to be, how can the schools benefit, how can we structure it. I trust my fellow board members to make sure that we're representing the best interests of the board. I'd be interested to hear if other board members are willing to say, the decision-making body is the full board, but in terms of getting down to the nitty-gritty, and just so you know, yes, Mr. McDonough is on that finance committee. Full disclosure, right? So I'd be interested to hear from other board members if this was something that we wanted to see if we could pass to the committee.
I think the committee's going to be very much involved in this whole topic. Speaking as a District 205 board member, I too am very concerned about porting. I see the entire surplus from the district, the 2004 amended TIF disappearing by being ported north. So I think we have lots to talk about with regard to that as well. I had one other question. On TIF 3, you talk about future projects being land acquisition, but that's not in TIF 3. I don't get that. How does that work?
Chuck, I'll ask you to explain the technical aspects of buying what it is. We're able to relocate public facilities, is my understanding. And so through that provision of the TIF statute, you can relocate the public facilities to another area outside of the TIF using the TIF dollars. That's fair.
Really? So you don't really make that part of the TIF? You just spend the TIF monies there?
That's correct, to relocate the public facility.
But haven't they already been relocated? Which public facility?
It was the Public Works Garage, but the Phase 1 was the actual property where the garage is. Phase 2 was the buffer strip that we purchased. Phase 3 would be the piece in between to further extend the facility into the future.
Okay. Sounds like a committee question to me. All right. Anything else we can talk about here? Mrs. Stufen.
Yeah. I do want to say that our responsibility really is to be the good stewards of education for the city of Elmhurst. So yes, I am for growth. I'm for smart growth with clear expectations. You heard all of our comments about the student achievement. We're holding ourselves as a board accountable to, results and, doing the right thing and, working together and partner. We're holding the district and, we need to do that. We need to be the models of that, okay? So I think that it's smart growth with clear expectations, oversight, accountability, to meet the expectations and to really look at, to Maria's point, metrics of results. I agree with the presentation that Chris was put together, and I think that you had seen it beforehand, just about from a school district. It's reality. I mean, we are the people that are accountable to being good stewards of the education here. So I think that those points were very valid, that we really do need to think about from our responsibility. The question that I really have is, what's the compelling reason for the TIFs now, I guess, especially to Chris's point at the low rate at EAV? You can answer these questions if you'd like, or they could just be questions for food for thought, that what we're thinking about.
Well, in general, I would say, and as I mentioned before, certainly the real estate market is, for the last few years, has been in a lull. We see that starting to come around. We see people that are showing interest in development in general. These areas were identified in the comprehensive plan to be redeveloped. Again, further evaluated to see if some kind of economic development tool works. Looks like TIF districts work in this area. I think once word gets out to the development community that we're even thinking about it, certainly once we implement them, we are going to see quite a few developers coming in and looking at the opportunities that are there.
Okay. So with respect to that, the redevelopment, the pictures that Chris was showing with York and Villette, and I wasn't really clear as to what all the buildings were, but that actually did help me. And some of the areas are relatively newly developed, so I guess that's another question that I have about, I don't understand.
Some of them may look new, maybe they did a facade enhancement or something like that, but if you look at the disjointed properties and the way it was developed, there's some parcelization there where it would be difficult for one person to maybe acquire a number of parcels together. That's where the TIF can really help out in putting all that together. And it may be redevelopment, meaning knocking some things down and rebuilding something that makes more sense, better use, higher use for the area.
So I get the whole, donut hole, right? I think is the term that you use of you have to have contiguous areas to create the TIF. And I'm sure you did your homework to say, should we include these? But some of them just really are relatively new development.
And some of them may be pulled out once their phase one is done.
That's really what I'm
Yes.
thinking about.
Yeah,
So we still, this is not hard and fast.
Absolutely
we can
not.
say, really, let's look at these pieces and can we pull them out?
The boundaries that are in the report from Kane McKenna are not hard and fast. They're just general idea for them to take a look at to see if it meets the qualifications.
Okay. And more a curiosity question, I guess, is the percentage of residential versus commercial. Do you look at those things, and are those part of the redevelopment plans and the numbers for TIF?
As far as what's included in the TIF or what's built in the TIF?
Kind of what's your philosophy when you're doing TIFs, from residential to commercial?
Without having the comprehensive plan in front of me, I really can't say. Certainly, we can get that portion back to you and let you know what those say as far as, I think there's a mix of it within there. Obviously, if you build stores, certainly you want people to shop at them, and something that the mayor and I have talked about is adding density, especially to the downtown area.
Right.
So that whether that's offices or residential, because then you have people to support that. And you have the additional EAV growth, and I think what we've seen in the central business district area, from the residential areas that were built, I don't know how many students have come out of those. I don't think it's a very high number that have come out of there, and the EAV that's come out of there though has been tremendous.
And granted, that maybe historically has been the case, may not be in the future. Those are the sorts of things that we have to always be planning for. That, otherwise, we're not being good stewards of education. And those are the sorts of things that's what we're thinking about as we ask these questions. And that's why this is very good for us to talk. I do hope, that we do. And I do understand that we have to look at what percentage of our revenue really comes from this. And then that determines, really how much time we spend on it. But at the same time, this was our opportunity to kind of talk with you about what things that we're saying so that you can see that we are being good stewards to education for the community of Elmhurst, which is what you want.
Yeah, and I would say this is your first opportunity of a number
Thank
that
you.
are going to come.
One last question then, and I guess it's going to go to the porting, because I guess I wrote, does the new TIF adjacent to TIF 1 really extend TIF 1 for 23 more years because of porting?
No.
So explain that to me, because you can see that someone could draw that conclusion.
It does not extend the life of TIF 1, but it would allow us to take money from TIF 1 and put it into TIF, let's call it 4, to help the development of that area, or vice versa.
And I get why you would do it, but really it is extending TIF 1 23 more years.
No, because at the end of life, yeah.
Then you take that out. Yeah, okay, got it. But, okay.
Yeah, at the end of TIF 1, that property will still
Right.
be released.
Right, gotcha. Right. It is the surplus, though. Okay.
Before we let you off the hot seat, this is a workshop discussion meeting, and I would ask before you leave if there are any comments to be made from the audience. Seeing none, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you very much for coming this evening. We really appreciate all that you have taught us, all that we can learn from you, and I hope that this will be the first of many meetings where we can continue a great exchange and dialogue and truly work together to get the best possible situation for both the city of Elmhurst and the schools in Elmhurst. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for your time, President Deroni and Mr. Pernod and the entire Board of Education. We appreciate it. We look forward to being your partner with this project. Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is announcements of the upcoming meetings, which you can see for yourself. We have our regular business meeting on Tuesday, September 27th, which will include a public hearing on our budget, and then our workshop meeting for Tuesday, October 11th. Board communications, I just want to announce that we did have a special meeting last week where we did set up a committee structure for the school board. We are going to be forming official committees in the area of curriculum and instruction, finance and operations, a board improvement / policy committee, and a performance management / superintendent evaluation committee. All of these will be open meetings. They will all be posted. We will keep minutes. The minutes will be posted on the website so that you can see all of the work that we're doing. Are there any other board communications? Seeing none?
If I could, you can indulge me, I have one announcement.
Oh, I guess we can indulge you.
Thank you. I just want to say congratulations to two of the board members this evening through the Illinois Association of School Boards. Susan Deroni has maintained her master status level of leadership, and Maria Hirsch has also attained an award of level 1 for board excellence. So congratulations to both board members.
What that means is just a lot of meetings, you know that. All right, entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. McDonough. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Thank you very much. Thanks for sticking with us at home.